Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Saturday, so y'all know what that means. It's Sean Davis. It's me, your host, Brian Driscoll. It's the RTCF show, which stands for Recruiting Notre Dame Team T, and then some college football stuff. And the college football thing is going to take a little bit of a different angle today because we're going to talk about college football as it relates to Notre Dame. We're going to talk about, we did a show earlier in the week, Sean, where Vince and I talked about sort of the ideal Notre Dame schedule. And we're going to give you a chance to kind of share your view on that and what you think a Notre Dame schedule should look like. The middle portion of our show is we're going to talk a lot about the culture at Notre Dame that's going on right now and the changes in culture that Marcus Freeman has brought to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And who may or may not benefit from that on the current team. You know, will they benefit? Why will they benefit? And who will benefit the most? And why is it important? Because I know it's been a topic of conversation that we've had, you and I have had a lot of.
Yeah.
I know you've had a lot of conversations about it on your show with former players. And I think it's something that really sank home. And we'll get into, there was a tweet out this week that it made it really sink home that you and I talked about. So we're going to talk about that today. But first, Sean, we're going to kick things off with some recruiting coverage. I don't know if you all know this, but Notre Dame's got a huge recruiting weekend on right now.
Yeah.
Big weekend, and big in multiple terms. Number one, there's a lot of kids on campus, right? I mean, Notre Dame's got several players on campus. A lot of committed kids on campus. You know, you've got the Don Schuler's on campus. Peyton Bowen's on campus this weekend, who is a little bit different than the other committed kids because he's a kid that they've got to try to convince to say it's time to shut this thing down.
Mm-hmm.
Where a lot of the other kids that are on campus this weekend, Sean, are kind of like, okay, they're pretty set. They're on campus more to recruit others, right? So Preston Zinter's on campus to help recruit Jaden Osbery and Ronan Hanafin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sullivan Absher and Sam Pendleton are on campus this weekend to kind of help recruit Monroe Freeling. And Devin Houston's on campus this weekend. Let's see, the committed kid from the Maryland, D.C. area is on campus the same weekend as the uncommitted kid from Maryland, D.C., who happens to play the same position. And, of course, Jaden Lamar and C.J. Carr are also on campus this weekend. So big weekend for Notre Dame. And, of course, not just committed kids, some very, very important uncommitted players. And Notre Dame is in a unique position, Sean, that they are 15 kids deep into a class that's going to have about 25 to 27 players. So they're basically at that halfway point, past that halfway point. So the board is smaller now, and you're able to focus in on the important players. And there are some big time guys on campus. So we're going to go kind of position by position, talk about who is on campus, where things stand with them, what we're hearing, but then also take a little bit of a different spin on it, is explain why these guys are important to Notre Dame. And so we'll kind of dive into that. But I also see somebody said, Sean, that somebody said that they got to get that green hat. And then somebody else said they like the white hat. His hat, my hat, this shirt, that flag, you can find them all at the Irish Breakdown merch store. There is a link in the description box below. So, Sean Davis, let's dive into recruiting.
Let's do it.
Let's start off with, you know what, I'm going to call an audible from what we talked about before because I want to talk DB recruiting. We've got to, right?
Hot route.
Yes, hot route. There you go. There we go. Okay. If y'all knew what we were talking about before the show. So there's obviously some committed kids on campus this weekend. Adon Schuler's on campus. Adon is recruiting heavily for Notre Dame. He's a big recruiter for Notre Dame. You also have on campus this weekend Peyton Bowen, who is in a unique situation because he's a committed player. If you talk to any of the current commits, you've talked to a lot of kids, uncommitted players too. He is recruiting heavily for Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
He's heavily involved with the committed kids, yet he still keeps telling people he's still going to take visits. So I think this weekend is really important. It's sort of like the March thing that kind of happened with Keon Keeley, like it's time to say this is what we're doing, right? Yeah. And that's the big thing. If you can come out of this weekend with Peyton Bowen being willing to say kind of publicly, like, I'm done. Sorry, Bama. Sorry, Michigan. Sorry, Oklahoma. I'm done. I think that to me is one of the most important, but not being talked enough about aspects of this weekend.
We talk about retention, right? Everyone gets up about having a number one class, but the next step is once you get these guys in the class, you have to retain them. And Peyton Bowen is going to be one of the biggest challenges in retaining him within the class. And it's just different, right? Whether it's coaches for these players, the families for these players, or the young men themselves, there are a lot of different opinions on when someone should commit, but still take your official visits. It's just a lot of theories out there on how recruiting should go for a particular player and a young man. So, he's of the mindset that he wants to get the full experience of recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, he is part of, I would say this, players that love Notre Dame, are still considering Notre Dame, and might possibly be leaning to Notre Dame, are being influenced by what he's telling them. So although you might not like the fact that he's committed and still taking visits, the fact that he's out there and he's one of the main guys that is really pitching Notre Dame to the guys that are uncommitted lets you know that his heart really is at Notre Dame. And I think that kind of eases things, even though you still don't like him being committed and taking official visits.
To me, Sean, it's why this weekend is so important with Peyton Bowen.
Yeah.
Because we talked about this in a show earlier this week where, yes, he's doing all that recruiting and it's having an impact, but there's still that same thing of, well, wait a minute, I'm also looking at Bama. So, here's a perfect example. We're going to talk about Caleb Downs in a minute. If Peyton Bowen's on campus this weekend doing what you and I anticipate he's doing, because that's what we hear from recruits that he's doing, which is convincing kids to come to Notre Dame, well, one of the top schools for Caleb Downs is Alabama. So if you're talking to Peyton Bowen and you're like, hey, Notre Dame's the place to be, and you say, well, then why were you at Alabama 2 weeks ago or a week ago? I mean, that's an interesting thing, right?
Yeah.
That and how that conversation goes could have a very, very interesting aspect, way to really, really impact on that recruitment and other recruitments, because he is a top 50. A top 50 guy. There's no question about it. So he's an important piece. Obviously, Don Schuler's solid in the class. I mean, his dad is probably as good of a recruiter for this class than as all the recruits. There's 2 DBs on campus this weekend, Sean, that are vitally important. One is vitally important that hits a huge need. The other one is more of a not necessarily a need per se, because Notre Dame does have 2 commits in the class, but this is the gap eraser type of player. We're going to talk about both of those. So let's first begin with Christian Gray, because right now, if you look at Notre Dame's number 1 ranked class, there's 2 big, giant, glaring holes, one on each side of the ball. The one on offense we're not getting into today because there's not a kid from that position on campus this weekend. Defense, it's corner. I don't have any corners committed in this class. There's 2 kids at Notre Dame, 2.5 kids that Notre Dame is really zeroing in on at corner. And I say half because another young man on campus this weekend is Mike Ateez, who they're more than willing to give a shot at receiver, especially now that Rodney Gallagher. So we'll talk about him at the very end. The kid that's on campus this weekend, it's Micah Bell's on campus next weekend. He's a must-get for Notre Dame. The kid that's on campus this weekend is Christian Gray. So let's first talk about just kind of what we're hearing about how the visit's going very briefly, because we don't want to give too much away in regards to that, because, look, visits evolve. You may have a great first day and not a good second day, and then we'll dive into why he's important to this class and why he's a guy that Notre Dame has to close on. So, Sean, Christian very well.
Yeah.
Just kind of give us a quick vibe on, where things were. You wrote an article at Irish Breakdown kind of leading into the visit, where things stood kind of coming into the visit, and then just where things are now.
Well, it goes back to that word, the connection to Peyton Bowen. And what I said, Christian Gray is one of those guys that Peyton Bowen has been working on along with Drake Bowen over the last 3 or 4 months. We've chronicled this before. There was a chance he was going to commit to Notre Dame in the fall. Backed off of that a little bit. His former high school coach and mentor took a job, defensive back coach down at LSU. LSU jumped into the picture. USC jumped into the picture, along with Ohio State, which was one of the first schools to offer him. So now, he has this open recruiting, and he goes through the spring And because there hasn't been any connection to Notre Dame in form of visit or anything like that, people thought, oh man, he's not feeling Notre Dame. And that couldn't have been further from the truth. Like Notre Dame has been at the top the entire time and was really one of the schools that was going to stay there and be there right to the end. So when you talk about him coming into this visit, he's coming off the LSU visit, had a great time. And so, of course, his former mentor and coach is down there, comes into the Notre Dame visit, very excited, shared with me that he's still anxious, starting to feel some nerves, close to his decision date of July.
Less than a month away.
Less than a month,
less than a month
2
away.
weeks away, pretty much, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So he's starting to feel the nerves. And then after he leaves Notre Dame, he goes out to USC, comes back. Ohio State gets the last crack at him. So he anticipated that he would have a great time because every visit has been pretty much amazing for him. Every time he's gone to Notre Dame. The last time he was here was in April, and he anticipated that it would be the same this time, but he just wanted to make sure. That's the one thing he wanted to tell me. I want to make sure that the vibe I always felt is still there. So he has all the information he needs about the school. He's been here. This is his 5th visit. No need to go in and ask questions. He knows. He has a great relationship, and now he just wants to make sure that what he has been feeling each and every time, that special feeling, if it's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about his recruitment, Sean, is Notre Dame has always been a major player for him, but there's no doubt that they went from, like you said, they were the team. I mean, we were anticipating him potentially committing like late fall. We started to hear that, and then he made a visit. I think it was like that January 29th weekend. I'm looking at the visit schedule now. I think he was on campus that weekend, and there was a lot of rumblings he was going to pop right after that. And then, like you said, Ohio State and LSU got only in the mix. Notre Dame was still there, but they definitely fell behind those other schools. And LSU especially was considered for a while the leader because of you mentioned about Coach Steeples being hired, who's a really good guy. And if you ever got to know him, really really good coach, had success at DeSmet, went to the NFL, former NFL player, and is now at LSU. And so he was sort of one of the finalists for the cornerback's job that Mike Mickens got. Right. So good football coach and obviously going to have that relationship with Christian Gray. You wrote an article. I think it was Christian, I believe, came back on campus in, I think it was March, Sean, March or April. He came back on campus. Was it the Blue Gold game? I'm trying to remember when he was on campus. Maybe it was before the Blue Gold game. I'm trying to remember when exactly it was. But there was a comment he made that Notre Dame is making a move. And it was kind of like Notre Dame had fallen and they started to ascend again. And the comment that you made to me at the time was really interesting, was basically Christian Gray's a Notre Dame kid. I just don't know if he quite realizes it yet.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that's changed in recent weeks is I think he realizes look, LSU's DBU and the connection with the position coach, Ohio State, is if LSU's not DBU, in the last decade, Ohio State is. And obviously what they bring to the table. But at the end of the day, there was that one team that's just been lurking all around. Now, obviously, he's got a visit coming up to Ohio State and USC.
Yep.
But I think this is closing weekend for Notre Dame, right? And we're not going to hear anything publicly about his recruitment in regards to being done. But this is the chance for Notre Dame to say, we're going to end this sucker and it's going to be over with. And that's going to be a very important piece of that because he is I would argue, one of the 5 most important recruits on the board. Not necessarily, ranking them 5 best, but because he does play at a position where Notre Dame doesn't have anybody and needs another strong year like last year at corner. And I also think he's an important recruit from a perception standpoint too, Sean. And the perception being, number one, you got a top 100 corner. Number 2, you beat LSU for him, who hired his position coach or hired his head coach in high school. And then number 3, not only did you beat an SEC school for a kid from a state that's got an SEC school in it, you came back to do it. You beat Ohio State, but also it's big for Mike Mickens.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I would argue Christian Gray I would argue that Benjamin Morrison graded out higher for me, even than Christian Gray, who's a top 100 recruit. But the perception isn't there because he wasn't a highly ranked recruit. So if you beat Bama and Washington for Benjamin Morrison last year, and then you beat Ohio State and LSU for Christian Gray this year, who's also a highly ranked recruit, some of the talk about Mike Mickens is going to stop real fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another reason why this is important. And then all of a sudden, even though he hasn't changed at all as a recruiter or a coach, some of the vibe about him changes, which then impacts recruiting that position moving forward. So that's why Christian Gray and Micah Bell are super important in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Not just from a practical standpoint, they need them as players, but I think it really helps silence some of the, I think, unfounded criticism about Mike Mickens as a coach and especially as a recruiter.
And it's very important to get both of those guys because it gives you one kid that's very athletic that can be more of your bump and run corner, and then you have your big physical corner on the other side.
And that's great, Christian Gray.
A great combination. And that would be Christian Gray. So that's what you want in your room. You want diversity in that room. You want to be able to have guys that can do both things, and it's going to end up making that back end much better if you can get both of them in the fold.
Right. So Christian Gray is the big one. Caleb Downs is another one, Sean. And every time he visits, I get told the same thing by sources. He loves it at Notre Dame. And I'm hearing it again, right? Like, dude, I've literally had 4 sources reach out to me without me asking, talking about, man, Christian Gray is loving his visit to Notre Dame. I just can't. It's one of the last bits of BK PTSD I got left in me, Sean.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
yes,
I get it. Like, it's just one of those things that's still there. I just can't.
Right.
I can't accept that at the end of the day, he's going to turn down Bama and Georgia and come to Notre Dame. But if he doesn't pick Notre Dame, there is nothing else the staff could have done. I mean, they have done they have made if he does pick Bama or Georgia, which ultimately I will not believe he's picking Notre Dame until the day he picks Notre Dame. And it has nothing to do with Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs is an incredible Notre Dame fit. He is a Notre Dame kid. It's just, again, it's my BK PTSD. It's like 5-star public school kid from Georgia, not going to the national champs the last 2 years from the SEC. I have a hard time with it.
Yeah.
But if they're able to get him, man, it sends shock waves. But even if they don't get him, I think his recruitment showing that Notre Dame is, and you've said this, Sean, multiple times in conversation with us. I know you've tweeted about it. This staff is not afraid to go to anyone else's backyard and say, we're going to do everything we can to take your best players.
Yeah.
And Caleb Downs is one of those, the primary examples of that.
I tweeted this out on Thursday. I love the audacity of this coaching staff. Like the unmitigated gall to walk into Mater Dei. How dare you walk into Mater Dei? Don't you know this is USC's pipeline? How dare you walk in there and ask for 3 of their top players and offer 3 of their type players? Like, how dare you walk into Nick Saban's backyard 90 miles east and offer and have a great relationship with the number 1 defensive back and the number 4 player in the state of Alabama and Jalen Mbakwe? Like, how dare you? How dare you go down to New Louisiana, Baton Rouge's backyard, and get Jaden Osbery up here and have him be high on his list? The audacity of this coaching staff is absolutely amazing. I love it. I love their approach to recruiting. They're not scared, and they have this ability, Brian, that I don't know if the previous coaching staff didn't have it. I'll let you take that part. But they have an ability to make recruits believe that Notre Dame is a special place and on the verge of doing special things. And that, when you get that feeling, that's the type of feeling you have to get a kid to leave his comfort zone, programs like Alabama and Georgia, to come to South Bend. They have to have something that they believe in that is worth more than just what they would get from a football standpoint down south. And I'll tell you this, just a tidbit. I told you about a conversation I had with a Notre Dame great, and he flat out asked me about Caleb Downs. He'll be on campus this weekend.
Yes.
To talk to the young man.
Yes.
Notre Dame is pulling out all the stops
Oh gosh,
to get
yes.
this young man.
That's why I say if they don't get him,
Yeah, you
it's
tip your
just
cap.
you got to go win a playoff game or a title for. I mean, there's nothing else they could possibly do. You asked me about the previous staff, Sean, and we were supposed to talk about culture in the next segment, and we will.
Yeah.
But I think the Caleb Downs thing and what you just said is part of that. You know, Kenny Moore says, "What's good, IB?" Freeman is definitely changing the culture. He's rebranding Notre Dame as we speak, and I think that applies on the recruiting trail as well. Sean, listen, man. Here's the deal. You know this as well as I do. We both have preaching experience, right? You've worked in radio. I've worked in coaching. I mean, we've done a lot of these things where you've got to deliver a message. Here's the reality of it. Most people, especially young men like Caleb Downs,
Yes.
especially young men like Keon Keeley, especially young men like Peyton Bowen, especially young men like Dante Moore, especially young men like like Ronan Hanafin, and I could go down the list of all these big time players in Notre Dame. They are savvy kids that see through the bull crap.
Yes.
And you can say, I mean, the previous staff sold the academics. I mean, they started the 4 for 40 and what makes Notre Dame unique. But if you don't believe it to be true in your heart, you can't sell it to a degree.
Good point.
The biggest difference is Brian Kelly sold those things as talking points. But then he would open his mouth and talk about how all these challenges that they face in Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Whereas when Marcus Freeman talks about how Notre Dame is special, he actually believes it. He doesn't talk down the university in other ways. I mean, so it's like I can preach a message and it sounds good and I'm going to continue to get paid. But if I don't believe it in the heart of hearts, it's not going to be life altering. And recruiting's the same way.
It's not transformational.
No.
There's no power to it.
No,
Yeah.
there's not. And the reality is it's got to come from the very top. And that's the biggest difference. I mean, we interviewed an offensive lineman yesterday, a 3-star offensive lineman. He was a 3-star consensus at the time. A couple of the outlets like 247 Sports have recognized his ability and they're starting to move him up. You know, they have him in the number 223 overall.
Right.
So they're coming around. But at the time when he and I were talking, he was a consensus 3-star recruit from Arizona. And I asked him, I said, so what's it been like talking with Coach Heastan and the nerd, who else do you talk to? And no, I just said Coach Heastan, and he just starts talking about Coach Heastan. He goes, but then he starts talking about Marcus Freeman. Like he loves Coach Heastan, but then he starts talking about Marcus Freeman. Like, yeah, I talk to Coach Freeman all the time. Like this, why is the head coach calling a 3-star offensive lineman? Right? Because he gets it, right? Because he believes in it.
Yeah.
And because his offensive line coach said, I want that kid.
Yeah.
And it's okay, let's do it.
Let's get
right?
it.
And I think that's the culture aspect of it. And you don't get this far with Caleb Downs if that's not the case. Right? Like, you don't get CJ Carr to come to Notre Dame as a sophomore.
Yeah.
If with the change that has happened since November.
Yeah.
Those things just don't happen. You're not sitting here with the 15 kids you got in the class if that's the case. And so the culture change doesn't just start on the team. If anything, we've seen it begin even sooner on the recruiting trail because we saw it last year with the defensive recruiting.
Yeah.
And so to me, Sean, that's kind of where I'm at with it is I think that's the big thing about like the Caleb Downs recruitment and some of these other things. I think the culture change is also impactful there. And you have a head coach that buys into it. And then you hire coaches that if the head coach buys into it, you're going to buy into it as an assistant coach and you're going to sell it. And to me, that's the big change. But that's the only reason Caleb Downs is now making his 4th trip to Notre Dame. Again, I'm not going to I'm not look, I could sit here and say all the great things and repeat all the things I'm being told and make everybody sound good. And then when he doesn't pick Notre Dame, I can say, well, things change. I'm going to give you my honest opinion, and I hope I'm wrong. But again, it's not even about Caleb Downs. It's just I've been doing this a long time, and Notre Dame just doesn't go down to the Southeast and get public school kids that are 5 stars that are looking at Bama and Georgia. It just doesn't happen. And, if they're able to do that, because like when they got Keon Keeley, he was not a top 100 recruit, much less a 5-star.
No.
He's also from a private school. Cal Hamilton was from a private school. So the circumstances are different. And if they're able to get Caleb Downs, who, again, is the epitome of what Marcus Freeman said when he got hired in that interview with Chris Zorich. We talk a lot about Notre Dame kids. Well, it's my job to go find Notre Dame kids that basically don't know that they're Notre Dame kids and convince them of it. And I don't know if there's a better representative of that than Caleb Downs. I mean, there's several, and I've said that about 3 or 4 kids. He's definitely in that mix of, 5-star player, very good student, values academics, right? That's part of the reason he's been on campus 4 times. That's part of the reason his brother went to North Carolina, right? His older brother Josh went to North Carolina. It's a very good school.
Yeah.
And so it just that would be the litmus test. There's 2 recruits in 2023 that are tidal wave recruits. And the one on defense is Caleb Downs.
Caleb Downs.
Yeah.
You watch film of this kid, Brian. He's being recruited as a safety. This kid he plays quarterback. He plays wide receiver. He plays cornerback. He's just a flat out 5-star elite athlete, right? And he's a difference maker. He's a difference maker. Use tidal wave. He's a difference maker. I want to point this out, though. The family message that is being preached, and it comes from the top, like you said, but the players have grabbed hold to it. And when you see Adon Schuler tweet out this morning a picture with him, Peyton, and Caleb Downs, like Notre Dame's future safeties, it's like, okay, that's why Caleb Downs would leave, because he feels like these guys are my family.
Right. That's what's important about this week.
Yeah, and that's what's so important, and that is one of the things, along with what 4 for Forever and everything that goes along with Notre Dame. That's something that I think has been hidden. We won't get into it. Why? Because you would have to dig deep and know players to understand the brotherhood and the family.
Right.
But now when Marcus Freeman is being opened for everybody to see and for recruits to feel, this is Notre Dame. We are family. It's a brotherhood. Come join us.
Right. I think there's another aspect to it, Sean, also, on top of the things we've talked about. If you get him, it opens up the floodgates for the Southeast for kids like him.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that's is a big part of this as well. So one of the questions we had, and I cannot find the question, I should have started. I apologize. But there was a question that asked, let's just say hypothetically they do get Caleb Downs. How would they get all 3 of them on the field together? Number one, that's not that hard. Notre Dame plays 3-4 safeties at a time, so you'll have them in a rotation. Number two, another way to do it is not only do you do a rotation in your base defense, there's also nickel packages that would get a 3rd safety on the field as well.
Yeah.
And I think with Peyton Bowen especially, like I could see Caleb Downs being a nickel. Like Ryan and I even talked one time about, especially if you're a zone team, I could see him being a big corner. Caleb Downs is incredibly athletic. Like he could be a rover, a strong safety, a free safety, and a boundary corner. Like he is that kind of special athlete.
Yeah.
I don't know if corner's where I would put him because I don't think that's his best position. Just like I don't think rover is where you're going to maximize his talent. He'd be a very good rover, but is that really where you're maximizing his talent the best? But he could do those things. The point, however, is between him. I also would say similar things about Peyton Bowen.
Facts.
Could play big corner, could play nickel. So the point is, Adon Schuler's the kind of the true safety of the group, right? Yep. And those other kids can play nickel, can play corner. So I think that's easy to say. Like, look, you get one of those two, Schuler or Downs or Bowen can kind of play like a nickel spot. And then the other part of it is if you want to go to a 3 safety look where you want to get more of a thumper down near the box, that's where now Adon Schuler becomes a potential 2nd level guy in a nickel type of defense. Let's say you're playing an air raid team that throws the ball a lot. Obviously they're going to throw the ball a lot to the perimeter. So you got to be good tacklers on the perimeter, but they're also like a North Carolina air raid where they want to run the ball. I look at, okay, let's put Adon Schuler in as a rover. Let's put him in as a nick in certain nickel looks and say, hey, look, when that's going to give us a guy that can cover on the field, but also a guy that can come up and blow up the perimeter screens and be a runner and that kind of stuff. So there's lots of different options to match up with those guys, because I do think Caleb and Peyton have a similar skill set that allows them to play all over, which means they don't it's not like Caleb and Peyton are going to be competing at the same position the whole time. They're so versatile that if you can't get both of those guys on the field at the same time, you need to find another line of work.
Yeah.
Right. But then you have Adon brings a completely different type of skill set to the table, which would make that a really unique trio. So I don't think it'd be hard at all to get those three guys on the field. And that's the other thing, too, is you see the father of the lowest ranked guy in that group, right? Adon's the guy that's not getting the love from a recruiting ranking standpoint. Rivals just dropped him out of the top 250, which is absurd to me, right? Like, speaking of finding new things to do with your career, like whoever fought for that decision. But the point is, his dad is probably the one that should be most concerned about Notre Dame getting a Caleb Downs. He should be most concerned about getting a Caleb Downs because he'd be perceived as the number 3 safety. But who's the guy there pushing for him? It's Adon and Mr. Schuler.
Yeah.
Which just kind of goes to show that, like, look, we know, which tells me two things. Number one, the Notre Dame coaching staff has made a very clear pitch, not only to Caleb, but to Adon about how that trio works. And then they also look at last year's safety class that had a grand total of 0 players in it, and that helps as well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that speaks volumes about about even a guy like a Don Schuler and his dad, Don Schuler, that there's no Sean, there's no ego there. It's like, look, man, we're trying to get this ring, you know, and the 3 of us is better than 2 of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love
it. And it's so funny with you saying all of that. If I'm an offensive coordinator going against those guys, I'm like, yo, let me just go 3 tight ends, 1 wide receiver all day to take one of them off the field, because I don't want to
force them into their multi-linebacker set so they can get Josh Burnham and Junior Tuihalamaka and Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler and Drake Bowen and Preston Center and maybe a kid from Louisiana on the roster.
So basically you're telling me
you're effed.
Either way, yes.
But that's where we're at, though, right? That's why like Caleb Downs is so important, because you got a really good safety in Adon Schuler. You've got a top 50 caliber player in Peyton Bowen, and then you add a 5-star kid like Caleb Downs. That's a game changer. But again, as I've said, I'll believe it when I see it, but I'm not going to just ignore the conversation because of my paranoia. And so that's why we had a conversation about it. So DB, big weekend on campus. It's also a really big weekend for the receiver position.
It is.
There are 2 kids that Notre Dame has got on campus this weekend that are incredibly important to this class, and that is Ronan Hanafin and Rico Flores, for completely different reasons. I want to begin with Ronan Hanafin. We wrote coming into the visit, Sean, that this could be the game changer weekend for him. Ronan is looking at Nebraska and BC as well, but it's Notre Dame, Clemson, and Bama are the 3 main contenders for him. And Alabama's recruiting him on defense. And I think that the thing that helps Notre Dame and Clemson is they're both recruiting him on offense. And Ronan has been adamant from day one, I'll play wherever you need me. I'm going to go to the school that's best for me. And even if it's not necessarily the position that I want to play.
Yeah.
But because he's an offensive guy, I think that does hurt Bama, because I don't know if a lot of the other things that Ronan is looking for necessarily fit Bama. I think it's more about it's Bama, right? And the position they're recruiting him for, my understanding is the position that Nick Saban coaches personally. So, you know, when Nick Saban wants you to play his position, it's like that's why they did so well at corner for so many years.
Yeah.
You ever notice that ever since he stopped coaching corners, they haven't recruited corner the way that they used to?
They haven't.
I'm just saying. So that's a big one. But Clemson obviously has done a great job with him. Coach Sweeney has done a great job with him. The whole offensive staff has done a great job with Ronan Hanafin. They've made him such a huge priority. And then, of course, Notre Dame is there. So Clemson has made this sucker a game. I mean, I think a lot of people just assume that Ronan Hanafin's a no-doubt, no-brainer. It's not a problem. Maybe that was true 6 months ago. But as Clemson and Bama and Oklahoma and LSU and USC and Georgia recently offered him too, you know, that kid's is, I mean, other than Caleb Downs, I don't know if there's a more impressive offer list on campus this weekend, except maybe Caleb Downs and Peyton Bowen.
You're probably right.
Notre Dame, Bama, Georgia, Clemson, LSU, Ohio State, USC, Oklahoma. I mean, you have every national champion from here until 2013 is offered this kid.
Yeah.
And
that means they see what we see when we watch the film.
Right.
Like, I understand everybody wants to make the excuse of competition and all of that. Film is film. Like, either you have it or you don't.
That's right.
You immediately see that this kid has it.
You're a 4-4 or you're not. It doesn't matter who you play against. You're 6'2.5", 205, or you're not. It doesn't matter who you're playing against.
Right.
You're absolutely right. And this is a kid that, to me, I think Ronan does want to play defense. I think part of the issue too is it took Notre Dame some time to figure out where they liked him best. Because you've got two sides of the ball kind of fighting for this kid. Like, no, we want him. I think Chris O'Leary was like, no, I'd like this kid at safety. And then Marcus Freeman's like, yeah, but I kind of like him at Rover. And then Al Golden, may like him a linebacker. And Tommy Reese is like, oh, hold on a second. Like we kind of like him too, And I think there was that debate and that battle. And ultimately it came down to, okay, well, Ronan, what do you want to play? And I don't think Ronan had an idea of that early on.
Right.
I think he had kind of convinced himself early that defense was it because he has played defense longer. I think early on, that's where teams were recruiting him for. But as you started to see more and more teams watch his offensive film and kind of get past certain thoughts about, like you talked about earlier, Sean, and like Ryan talked about the other day, white receiver from Massachusetts, okay, Rover, linebacker. Well, then you dive into the film and you're like, this dude is really athletic and can really play. As more teams have started to kind of look at him as a receiver, I think that changed his mind because I think that's ultimately where he wanted to play.
Yeah.
And of course, Notre Dame settled in on that, and they've made him a huge priority. So he does not have any other visits set up yet, but I do know Alabama's really pushing to get him on campus next weekend. Notre Dame needs to close on this one in a big way this weekend. Like,
you do not
and I don't mean
going down there. Yeah.
You don't want him going down there. You don't want this thing dragging into July. This thing needs to be over this weekend. I mean, that's where it needs to be. That they've got to close this one out because forget the recruiting rankings. This is a big time player, and this would be a big time pickup. And it also fills a position that right now is still a big need. And it won't hurt that number one of his buddies is on campus this weekend, Preston Zinter. You saw that they flew in together.
Yep.
It won't hurt either that the 5-star quarterback that just committed is going to be on campus this weekend too. It's not a coincidence he's coming on campus same weekend as Ronan Hanafin. So this is a big, big, big recruitment, for Notre Dame. They've got to get a commitment from him this weekend because they need another big-time receiver in this class. I think Ronan complements Braylon James really well. He can play some X, he can play some Z, he can play some W. And the other thing too, he's just now scratching the surface of what he can be as a receiver because he's just out there being athletic. He has no clue how to play receiver right now. None. And you give Chancey Stuckey that kind of ball of clay, that's going to be something. It's going to be something.
That's his power forward. Remember, he talked about his wide receiver room being like a basketball team, starting 5. That would be his stretch 4/power forward. The guy that's 6 that's big, but still can go up, make plays, track the ball, make plays after the catch. Perfect fit if they can get that commitment from him. It would be wonderful.
Just found out. We weren't sure if this was going to happen this weekend or next weekend or this summer at all, but just got word. His mom just tweeted it out. Keon Keeley's on campus this weekend as well. So that's huge. You get your top-ranked, top 5 overall player stud on campus. It doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt.
I think Jaden Lamar is on campus too, right?
Yeah, we mentioned him earlier. We just weren't sure. We weren't sure about whether or not Keon was going to make it because they were trying to move him to next weekend to be on campus with someone else they thought was going to be on campus next weekend, but he's not going to be on campus now. So he's on campus this weekend. That's a big one for Notre Dame. You get Keon Keeley on campus.
They were all together getting haircuts last night.
Yes.
So I saw that on Instagram. That was pretty cool.
So, Sean, Peyton Bowen's, not Peyton Bowen, Ronan Hanafin, very, very, very important player for Notre Dame. Have to get him. Would be a huge feather in Chancey Stuckey and Tommy Reese's cap. And I'll be honest with you, Chancey Stuckey's recruiting him, but Tommy Reese is kind of taking this one over. If that tells you what Notre Dame thinks about him. And it's not because Chancey Stuckey doesn't like him or doesn't want him. It's more like when the big guns come out, the big dogs come out, like this is a guy that they want. And here's another interesting fact. I don't know if people know this. Do you know who the person who made the initial decision that we're going to push hard for this kid? It's Marcus Freeman. He was making his East Coast swing early in February, if you remember, or was it January? It was one of the first times he got on the road. I think it might have been January. Now that I think
it was right after the bowl game, right?
You could be right. And he went to the Northeast because you had Preston Zinter, you had Ronan Hanafin, you had Samson Okunlola, you had a lot of Northeastern, and then he was going to go see Tai Chan. because see him face to face and all that kind of stuff. Because Ty Chan's up from that region. I think they went and saw Boubacar at the time, but they didn't know a lot about Ronan Hanafin at the time, from what I'm told. Marcus Freeman went to the school, met Ronan, watched some film, and what I was told is called the staff and was like, you better we need to get this kid.
Yeah.
Right. And so basically whoever's going to be in charge of his recruitment, don't screw this one up. Right. Like, so when the boss says, this is one of my dudes, like he was like with Ronan Hanafin, kind of how I am with Jaden Osbery. Like, this is the kind of guy you win championships with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And it's your task to get him. Don't mess it up. So if you're Tommy Reese, you're like, okay, I got this one. I'm going to make sure I get this one done. So I think that tells you a little bit about where Notre Dame views Ronan Hanafin. Yeah. Nick Saban's personally recruiting him at Alabama. Dabo's personally recruiting him at Notre Dame or at Clemson. And then Marcus Freeman and Tommy Reese are very involved in his recruitment at Notre Dame. I think we can dispel the 3-star stuff now, right, with Ronan Hanafin. Another player on campus this weekend is Rico Flores. This is a very fascinating and interesting recruitment, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, here's the lowdown. And if you're on the message boards, you know this a couple days ago. So I'm going to put it out there now. So basically, Rico's top school for a long time has been Ohio State. He's got a Final 3 of Notre Dame, Ohio State, Georgia. And he's in love with Ohio State, as we understand why. You look at what Ohio State's done in recent years at receiver, it makes sense. If you're a receiver who thinks you're an NFL player, it would make sense why you want to look at Alabama and Ohio State. And so he's really tied with Ohio State, but for a while there, Ohio State wasn't necessarily pushing for him because they thought they were going to get Cardinal Tate, Brandon Inniss, and Noah Rogers. Well, now they're not going to get Cardinal Tate, we don't think. Right. I'm not trying to take his moment, but that's what is being reported publicly, is that it's going to Ohio State. Alabama is making a hard push for Brandon Inniss and is making that a little bit difficult. And he said he's going to wait to the end. So now Ohio State's starting to ramp things back up again. Well, in the meantime, Notre Dame has really charged on this one, Sean. And Rico, I don't believe, has been on campus before. So a couple interesting things about this. Rico is, I think, either a 4.0 student or a borderline 4.0 student. Very high academic kid. I believe, if I remember correctly, Sean, I'm going to pull this up now. I believe he actually has a couple Ivy League offers. This is a kid from Northern California. If my memory serves me correctly, he does have some Ivy League offers. I could be, yes, Yale has offered this kid a scholarship. So big time player, talented player, big time academic kid, talented player. Notre Dame took advantage of the little bit of the uncertainty with where he stood with Bama and Clemson, or Ohio State and Georgia. So what we found out kind of coming in the visit is Mom is very much in favor of the team in South Bend.
Oh, no surprise.
Yes. Shocker.
Yeah.
Shocker. What was it, the comment you made to me the other day? If Notre Dame got every kid whose parents want them at Notre Dame, they would have every top 100 kid in the country except for 2.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
And we know who those 2 are.
Every recruit, the parents all want the kids to go, right. Yeah, Notre Dame.
Right.
Notre Dame.
So I think Notre Dame stepping into that void and taking advantage. It's like they saw their opening. It's like they saw their opening, smelled blood in the water, and they went for the attack. That has allowed Notre Dame to put themselves in a really good position coming into this weekend.
Yep.
He now has an Ohio State and a Georgia visit coming up, which means you have to absolutely dominate his recruitment this weekend. Like, if you're going to get him to not either go to Ohio State or go to Ohio State and then say no to Ohio State when he visits again, you have to knock it completely out of the park this weekend. So this is a very, very important recruitment for Notre Dame. And this weekend is going to make or break whether or not Notre Dame has a chance to get him. Now, if you can get him to do what Elijah Page did, that's the ideal scenario. Like, for both of the receivers, Ronan Hanafin and Rico Flores, Sean, the goal is to kind of do with them what you did with Elijah Page. Elijah Page canceled 3 June official visits after visiting Notre Dame and said, I'm done. We asked him on the show yesterday, are you done? You still take it? Nope, not going to USC, not going to Michigan State, not going to Washington. If they can do that with Rico Flores and or Ronan Hanafin, then, that's how you seal the deal.
Yeah,
with Ronan,
He was supposed to be at Michigan State when he was talking to you.
Correct.
Right?
He was supposed to be on his way to Michigan State, right? or already there. Yes,
yeah.
Correct. So you love, and he was going to go to USC, I think, next weekend or the 24th. I can't remember which weekend he was going to USC, but he was going to go to USC as well. USC wanted him bad.
Yeah.
So this is a big weekend for those two guys, Sean. Now, I don't know if you can convince him to not take his visits, just like with Christian Gray. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to convince him not to take his final 2 visits, especially since they already have July commitment date set up.
Yeah.
But you, at the very least, you have to just completely put yourself so far out in front of those other schools that it doesn't matter what they do on the visits. You're gonna get them, and that's it's a tough task. But that's what Notre Dame has in front of them. And I believe Christian Gray and Rico Flores are both going to be at Ohio State next weekend.
I think so.
Christian's going to be there, right?
Christian's at USC next week.
I thought he was going to USC the 24th. You could be right. You're tighter to that recruitment than I am. I could have them backwards.
I think USC was the 16th, and then Ohio State got the last.
Okay, so he's going to be at USC this weekend, upcoming weekend, and then there. And I think that Christian or Rico Flores is going to Ohio State this next weekend, and then Georgia. No, I'm actually wrong. He's going to go to Georgia next weekend, and then he's going to be at Ohio State the weekend of the 24th, the same weekend as Christian Gray.
Yeah.
So, going to be very, very interesting in that area, Sean. No question about it. Offensive line. I mean, we can be quick about this one, right? You've got 4 really good players
with 1 spot, supposedly, right?
Left. We think that if the right 2 want to come, that they would figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah.
Monroe Freeling to me is the top player on the board. I love Charles Jagasol, but Monroe Freeling is a pure left tackle. He's the highest ranked guy on my board, arguably the highest ceiling. Although him and Jagasol and Page are in the conversation for highest ceiling. The big thing that Freeling has on Jagasol is he's a more natural tackle and a more natural pass blocker. Charles is going to have to learn that because he plays in a very run-heavy offense, as you know. But these 2 kids are both 5-star upside kids, and I think you got to get them both. You get Charles next weekend, you get Monroe this weekend. I feel like if you're Notre Dame, if you don't come out of this weekend feeling like we've got a great shot with this kid, that's where I think you start thinking about, like, okay, is this going to happen? I mean, this is his 3rd visit to campus, 3rd or 4th visit to campus.
Yeah.
If you don't come out this weekend, having met Harry Heastand 3 times now on your place, plus, him going out to your school, if you're not all about Notre Dame now, it's kind of like maybe there's just something keeping them from there. They've got Sullivan Absher and Sam Pendleton on campus. They've both become very friendly with Monroe, especially Sullivan Absher. They've visited. This is the 3rd time they visited together. So that's one where I've been told that some people are reporting that there's some, they're fading. I don't buy that. I don't think that's accurate. But this weekend, if you can't, you've got to try to seal the deal this weekend, even if it's just a silent. And then he still wants to kind of take it on. That's okay. You're still in pole position with that. And if he carries it out, it kind of benefits you, Sean, because it gives you more time to figure out how to make the 6 guys work. So I think those are going to be big parts of getting this class together. I think Monroe Freeling also, here's the other thing too, and this is not as important as him as a player.
Yeah. But
I think that it's also important to note that a guy like Monroe Freeling, who's a top 50 caliber recruit with most of the services, is also very important to maintaining that number 1 spot, which from a perception standpoint matters, right? Like Elijah Page helps you have potentially a great offensive line. So does Monroe Freeling, but Elijah Page is not a highly ranked kid.
No.
Monroe Freeling is. Charles Jagasol is. And that's why those guys are also important.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say, that's not even going out on a limb. You don't turn down the 2 top tackles on your board. Right?
Right.
I
don't think. Not when they're that good.
If they both want to come, you make room. Say, okay, instead of 5, we'll take 6. We're going to be even more dominant along the offensive line. They're in a really good position with both guys as far as being able to close and the possibility of closing things out in the month of June. We'll see what happens. I know the discussions we have, one is probably more of a battle than the other one at this point in time. And it should be interesting. It should absolutely be interesting. We're getting to a point in this recruiting where even where guys might be at a crossroad where they have to decide between 2 or 3 programs, when they look at the momentum of the Notre Dame class, it's almost like, I really like this school, but I would really love to be a part of that.
Right.
Like, this program is really good. I can see myself playing there, but do I miss out?
And they've already won titles.
Yes.
Right. Because with him, he's looking at Georgia, Bama, and Clemson.
Yeah.
Right.
But do I miss out on the opportunity to do it here and how special it would be? It's very interesting dynamic that's going on with,
and they're selling that.
Yeah,
they're selling that. This Notre Dame staff is selling that. There's no doubt about it. They're selling that. So this is a big weekend for Monroe Freeling. I'm very curious to hear how things go. We haven't heard anything yet, other than he's enjoying himself. But it's been a long time since I haven't heard during a visit kids not having fun. I mean, you don't hear that often. I think the last time I heard that was Joseph Osai. Remember that kid from Texas? He visited for the spring game, and he's like, there's a picture of him like falling asleep with his hand. He ended up going to Texas and being a really good player. So he is obviously a kid that you're looking at too. Let's talk about the final 2 guys, Sean, because we're going to talk some front 7 recruiting here now. And there's 2 guys on campus that I think are incredibly important. And they are not, neither one is necessarily at a position of need, but they are very, very important recruits from a standpoint of the recruiting rankings, but they're just excellent players. And that's Jason Moore and Jaden Osbery. I think 2 guys that are incredibly important to landing in this class. Let's talk about Jason Moore. It's not a coincidence that Notre Dame has Devin Houston and Keon Keeley on campus the same weekend as Jason Moore. Because Notre Dame's D-line class is done, Sean. I mean, it's done other than Jason Moore. And here's the thing about Jason Moore. You don't need Jason Moore. They want Jason Moore. It's kind of like this kid's too good. You know, you put him on one side and Keon Keeley on the other, or if he slides inside, you know, Ryan wrote about it today at Irish Breakdown, that he's the difference between having a really good, you know, top 2 or 3 in the nation D-line class, and not only the best D-line class, but sort of for Notre Dame, a generational D-line class. Jason Moore's the guy that says, okay, this is now better than the 2011 D-line class.
Yeah.
He's that kind of player. Yes,
that's saying something.
Yes, it is. He's a very important guy. So, I mean, he hasn't been on campus in a while. This is his first time to campus since Marcus Freeman's been named the head coach, because he was trying to come. Remember, he's
trying to come in April, right?
Yeah, and then his brother tore his Achilles at Villanova in the was it the Elite 8 game or the Sweet 16 game?
It was literally the game right Elite 8 before the Final Four. Yes,
it's a bummer.
Yeah.
So that kept it. Obviously, mom had to help take care of the older son, and that kept them from being on campus. But he's on campus this weekend with his mom. Sean, this is a big one for Notre Dame.
Must get. If you're trying to take that next step, and we talk about how the defensive line needs to take a step up and improve to become championship caliber, you need to get this guy in your recruiting class. You need to stack him with Keon Keeley, Brennan Vernon, the other kid they got from the East, Houston.
Right, and Boubacar
Traore. Stack those guys. And like you said, they're done, but you don't turn away a talent like this.
Right.
You know, which is so interesting when you look at this, and how things are going to happen moving forward. How do you balance momentum and kids that want to come with waiting on guys, top guys that you get, and balancing the numbers out? It's going to be very interesting to see, because it's going to end up being a good problem for Notre Dame in the 24 and the 25 class.
I think this is also how the game changing helps Notre Dame too, because there is so much more of an acceptance of rotating now. Yeah. Where 20 years ago, it was like, you're a starter, you play 85, 90% of the reps, if not all of them. There's more an embracing of playing a deeper D-line rotation. How do you play all those 5 guys together? Well, you don't go to a 5-2, but I'm going to play 8-9 D linemen every week. Right. And that's kind of how you have an elite defensive line. I mean, then when one guy goes pro, the next guy steps in. And I mean, Notre Dame in back-to-back years had both of their starting defensive ends get drafted. I mean, think about that. In 2019, Khalid Kareem and Julian Aguara go to the draft. They both get drafted that right after 2019.
Right.
A year later, Dalen Hayes and Adi Ogundiji are starters basically for 1 year.
Right.
And then they go get drafted. Right? I mean, that's the selling point that Notre Dame has. And then now you've got Al Washington as the guy selling it. That's kind of where, where this thing takes a big jump for me if you're Notre Dame. So he's a very, very important recruit for Notre Dame. And again, it's a little different than some of those other guys. But I think it's also important too is, man, Sean, they gotta start having more success at the Catholic schools in DC and in the DC area. And he's obviously at one at DeMatha Catholic. There's way too much talent that comes out of that region, and Notre Dame's just not tapping into it enough. Now, when they have Cam Hart, Sam Mustipher, they've been able to have mostly good players. I mean, DJ Brown's been a solid player. DJ Brown's not a bum. He's been a good rotation guy, good leader, and all that.
I will say this: DJ Brown made me upset a little bit this morning.
Okay, why?
Yeah,
what did he tweet about? It was about basketball.
I just watched the Fiesta Bowl over again.
Oh, gotcha.
So,
yeah,
I still love him. I love the kid.
I understand.
Yeah,
that was rough.
Yeah,
but you got Cam Hart from there. You got Sam Mustipher from there.
Yeah,
you've missed a lot of really good players from there. That's an area where Notre Dame has to have more success. I mean that should be prime Notre Dame area, and Ohio State makes a killing there. I mean, Bama's gone up there and gotten the Kajando brothers, Terrell Hall.
Yes.
I mean, Ohio State's got some really good players in that region. Michigan and Penn State have made, cleaned up there. Heck, even Stanford went into that league and got a quarterback in Kevin Hogan that, was
very solid.
Won more games than anybody else Notre Dame had the last 10 years of quarterback, right? And doesn't have the talent that most of those guys have, aka, development. So, I mean, that's kind of the reality of that situation. That they've got to get a foothold there. And if you can get, Devin Houston's not from that the big time programs, but he's at a private school in that area. You get Devin Moore, who's from that region. Now all of a sudden you start saying, okay, we're going to be a player here because these are two. Because Devin Houston's a top 200 kind of kid. He's a little bit underrated in my opinion.
Yeah,
but he hasn't been there that long. Came from Canada, and sort of a late bloomer as a football recruit. He kind of came out of nowhere. Where Jason Moore for over a year now has been considered one of the best players in his class.
Absolutely.
And he's a legit top 50 guy. So that's one of those sort of momentum building recruits a la Caleb Downs, Peyton Bowen and Braylon James in Texas are that kind of guy, and it only adds to the need to get him in this class, in my opinion.
Yeah. Let's do it, man. I'm so amped. This weekend is so inspiring as a fan. I mean, sometimes we have to pull the reins on ourselves and remember we're part of the media. But you know what it's like to get into that fan zone every now and then.
It's hard.
It's hard.
Well, it's a perfect segue because speaking of fan zone, last guy we're going to talk about is Jaden Osbery.
Yeah.
So, look, he's another guy, Sean, that I put him in the category of a Caleb Downs in that this is a kid that geographically is a tough get for Notre Dame. I mean, literally his high school is connected to LSU. I mean, literally. He's from Baton Rouge. His dad works at LSU. And everything in that regard is trending not in Notre Dame's favor. But then you kind of start looking into Jaden specifically, high academic kid, values education, not afraid to go away from home. Just then you talk to him and you're like, man, he talks like a kid. And I'm not talking about like tone and he sounds smart. I'm talking about just the way he talks about life and football and education. It's like, man, that's the kind of kid that leads to a Notre Dame decision.
Right.
And you go back to all the other things. Him and Caleb Downs are those guys that you look at and you say, these are Notre Dame kids. They just don't know it yet. Christian Gray's like that, right? Where you're a Notre Dame kid, you just don't know it yet. And now it's our job as a staff to convince you of that. And this is now going to be the third trip to Notre Dame for Jaden Osbery.
Yeah.
You're going to know this weekend if you have a shot to get him or not. Because if you can't get him to commit or really give you some strong vibes, you then got to start thinking about, okay, if we can't get it now, is it going to happen? Because you've now used your official.
Right.
So the hope if you can get him back on campus in the fall is for an unofficial. But if you can't seal the deal this weekend, And as far as I know so far, they have not. For all those people that have been reading into some posts yesterday, I wish I would have probably been much happier even in those gifts if it would have been him. But if they don't close it this weekend, they're going to have to start seriously thinking about if you want a third linebacker, you need to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
So this is an incredibly, and I don't know if I would say that about anybody else other than him and Caleb Downs. I think it's one of those is like, this is your last shot basically with those kids. And, so it's an incredibly important weekend for Jaden Osbery because he's a heck of a football player, but he's also a great fit. And again, it goes down to it. You get a kid from Baton Rouge to turn down LSU. I mean, how do you close the gap? You steal the top corner on their board and you steal the top linebacker on their board. That's how you surpass LSU. I mean, I would argue Notre Dame's already surpassed LSU on the football field, except for 1 year, one anomaly season that, kind of all the, you got the grad transfer quarterback, the 1 year OC, all that other kind of stuff, whatever. Yeah. But that's how you do it, right? That's how you then put distance between yourself and those programs. Yeah. Is you start taking the guys they want. You're talking about beating Alabama for Ronan Hanafin, beating Clemson for Ronan Hanafin, beating Georgia and Alabama for Caleb Downs, beating Florida and Alabama and Ohio State for Keon Keeley. Go down the list of all the, beating Oklahoma and Alabama for Peyton Bowen. I mean, beating Penn State and Ohio State for Jason Moore, beating Clemson and Georgia and Alabama for Monroe Freeling, beating LSU for Jaden Osbery. I mean, that's the other thing that we haven't even talked about a lot, Sean, and we probably should now that we're already an hour into the show. They're not battling BC for these kids. They're not battling, Texas Tech. They're battling. I mean, here's who's on Ronan Hanafin. It's Notre Dame, Clemson, and Ohio State. I mean, Alabama. Rico Flores. It's Notre Dame, Georgia, and Ohio State. Christian Gray. It's Notre Dame, LSU, Ohio State, and USC. Caleb Downs. It's Notre Dame, Georgia, Alabama, other such programs, right? Yeah. Monroe Freeling, it's Notre Dame, Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. Jason Moore, it's Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. Jaden Osbery, Notre Dame, LSU, Auburn, teams like that, right? These are all big-time players that they're battling big-time schools against. And the more of these kids you get, the fewer of these kids that are going to those programs. And that's what I've said. That's the closing the gap isn't just about you rising. It's about you rising while you're causing them to descend by taking players from them. That's a huge, huge aspect of that recruitment.
Check this out. I just thought about this. I liken the races or the competition for these players to a relay race. Mm-hmm. Schools like Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, that have won recent championships, they like to ease into things because they know their last leg is their best leg. Mm-hmm. They're used to closing kids late. They can afford to get on some kids. That's why you see a bunch of kids that Notre Dame have been on now are getting offers from Georgia and other SEC schools because they're used to closing late because they know they can always say, look, we win championships here. They have things that they can go to the other programs don't have. Notre Dame and this staff and the way they're doing things, they are literally jumping on kids and jumping out to leads on these players. And what they're doing now is they might end up forcing Georgia, Alabama to come out of their comfort zone and do things a little bit different. Because if they can close on a Caleb Downs, a kid like that, then they're saying, okay, we thought we could chase everybody else down, but we can't chase them down. And they're just at the beginning of the thing that they're trying to build. We might need to be more aggressive in 24 and 25. So Notre Dame and the coaching staff, they're really doing a great job of forcing the issue in recruiting,
right,
and getting these guys on campus, getting out to a lead with certain kids or making it very close with certain kids, because the advantage is read the tea leaves, know if we can close in the summer or in the spring, and let's not go into the strength of schools like Alabama and Georgia, which is the fall, when they can get them on campus and when they can watch them play on TV. Mm-hmm. We don't want to battle them that way. We want to win right now and then force them to have to change up and say, you know what, we can no longer depend on going into the fall, being able to close on these kids. They read the tea leaves properly, we think, on Samuel and Pemba and said, you know what, we're not going to use this visit in June. Let's push it back.
You're not getting him to commit in June, no matter how good next weekend's visit would have gone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now you're seeing the strategy, which is great. I don't know if that's how they looked at it.
No, it is. I mean, because we broke the news that he was going to push it back.
Yeah.
And it was expressed that way. Like, look, he's not making a decision until December.
Yeah.
So we have to hope, if we bring him in now officially, we have to hope that we can convince him to spend money on his own dime to come back up in the fall. Maybe he would, but it's harder.
Yeah.
So let's why not bring him in for the Clemson game?
Yeah.
It gets it about a month out from his decision because he's going to announce and sign in December most likely. It makes, and he's been on campus before, so it's not like you're risking like he's not going to see the culture and all. He's been on campus twice in the last year.
Yeah.
So it's smart. But I think the other thing too, Sean, is you've got to be smart enough to know who you are still.
Absolutely.
You can say we're Notre Dame, but you then don't start thinking you can just walk in and act like Bama.
No.
You have to say, okay, we're going to go after Bama. We're going to attack, but we've got to realize who we are, and that is you can't wait till the end of this whole thing to go out there and get kids because you don't have 6 championships in the last 15 years. You don't have 2 championships in the last 6 years like Clemson does.
Right.
You're not the defending national champs like Georgia is, right? And
Absolutely.
you don't have that bag to throw at some kids to get a kid late, which is a lot of times what can happen late in the game.
Yeah.
So if you're Notre Dame, you got to get them now and then hold on. That's the key. And that's where they're at now. Now, in 3-4 years, could they be in a situation where there's a couple positions where they want to see how the current roster plays out? They know they can flip some big-time kids late? Sure. It'd be nice to get there, but they're not there yet. And they have to be honest themselves about it, and they are. And the other part, too, that I think is masterful about this staff, because I would argue the previous staff knew that they had to fill up early, too. They did. The difference is this staff is looking to fill up early with dudes. They're not panicking into taking kids. Now, it doesn't mean that like every kid they get's a top 50 player, because Joe Otting's not that. Elijah Page is not that.
Yeah.
But they view them as definitely guys that they want. My point is they're not saying, well, I don't know if we're going to be able to get Christian Gray, so let's take this other kid that maybe is not as good of a player.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if we're going to be able to get Jason Moore, so let's take this other end who's like I've said this to you before, Brooks Barr is committed to Notre Dame if the previous staff is still here.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a nice, solid player. Don't get me wrong. But if he's a good player to have if you're trying to beat Michigan State and beat Illinois and beat Stanford and beat teams like that, but he's not a kid you bring in if you're trying to beat Bama and Georgia and Clemson and Ohio State.
Yeah.
But this staff said, hey, we like the kid. He's a good player, good kid, but we have our eyes set on something different. And they've gone out and got it. So, I mean, they've kind of hit the inside straight so far. Now they're really trying to take it to that next level with Jason Moore. So final kid on the board, Sean, is Ateez.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be brief here because he's an incredibly hard kid to read. He's been on campus before. I still feel like USC is the pick right now for him. If he had to pick today, if I had to predict today, I think USC would be the team I would go with.
Yeah.
But I think this weekend is very important for Notre Dame because this is the first time he's been on campus where they're going to be able to have a more thorough conversation with him about playing receiver. And I think that's going to be the thing. If you can convince him that he's going to get a legitimate shot to play receiver, not like we'll let you try it out for the first week and then move you back to DB. If they can really give him a shot, and here's the other thing. With Christian Gray on campus this weekend, if you can close on Christian Gray and then let this again hypothetically, and then let Ateez know that hey, look, just so you know, like we think we're going to close on Christian Gray. We feel really good about where we are with Micah Bell. We just lost Rodney Gallagher. All the stars have aligned for you to understand that when we talk to you about having a shot at receiver, we mean it.
We mean it.
That's the shot they have. If they can't convince him he's going to get a shot there, then because Oklahoma couldn't convince him to definitely be defense. If the in-state school can't convince him to stay on defense no matter what, Notre Dame's not going to be able to convince him of that. And so I think this is why it's going to be an important weekend for him. So,
well, I'll give this bit of intel. He is having an absolute amazing time.
Talking about Ateez?
Yes.
Okay. It's huge.
The first day was amazing.
It's huge.
Yeah. So hopefully the second day can trump that.
Well, it's a
Because I think
beautiful day
he
here in
actually
South
got
Bend.
in. He actually got in on the 9th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
According to
a
his
couple of those
Twitter
kids
Instagram.
did. Like Rico Flores got in Thursday night. Some of those, a few of those kids got in late Thursday night.
Yeah. So
it's very interesting.
Yesterday was a really, really good day for Mike Ateez and Notre Dame. And
that's what you need. You have to.
Yeah.
You have to. So that's kind of it for Sean for the recruiting aspect of it. I think we covered a lot more, even more than we thought we were going to do. Just start getting fired up. Like you said, man, let's get fired up about these kids. You just kind of get into it. So why don't we go and slide into part 2 of our show today, Sean?
So part 2 of the show was inspired by a video that I sent to you. Podcast All the Smoke with Matt Barnes and Stephen Jackson. They had special guest Kenny Smith on, and they asked him about Dean Smith and what made Dean Smith so incredible. And he said, one story stands out for me. He said, we had a guy named Maktar Njai. For those of you who don't remember, he originally went to Michigan and transferred to North Carolina. And he's from Nigeria, a small village in Nigeria. And Bill Guthridge was giving it to him in practice. And after it was tough practice for him, so he leaves practice, and Dean Smith catches up with him in the hallways and asks Maktar, what's wrong, man? And what's going on? And he kept asking him to look at him. Like, I'm talking to you. Look at me in my eyes. And Maktar finally said, sir, in my culture, it's disrespectful to look at the elders in their eyes. And Dean Smith said, okay, and walked off. Everyone thought Bill Guthridge was suspended for what he said during practice because he wasn't there for the next week. And all of a sudden, Maktar Njai gets a phone call, and it's his mom on the other end of the line. And his mom says, yo, I'm here, and I know Coach Smith, but I don't know Coach Guthridge. He says he's your coach. Do you know him? It's like, yeah. Oh, he's been here all week, and he's been finding out all about our culture so he can make you feel comfortable. Dean Smith went to that extent.
Right.
To make that kid who was not a starter, he might have been the 7th or 8th kid in the rotation. He wanted to make him feel so comfortable that he sent his assistant coach to his village for a week to find out all of his customs so that they can make him feel comfortable so he can play at the top of his game.
I'm gonna play that clip, Sean.
Okay, go.
Because I think it's going to add to where you're going with
about
this.
His inner person, who he was. My favorite story is not even with me. It's with Maktar Njai, who played at North Carolina. He was from Africa. Played at Michigan, transferred in.
Went to Oak Hill.
And went to Oak Hill. Yeah, he went to Oak Hill. So Mac was having a tough time in practice. So Roy Williams was assistant coach at the time, and Bill Guthridge. And so they're getting on Mac. Like, Mac, what's wrong with you? Blah, blah, blah. Coach Smith never cussed. Ever. Never cussed. So they're getting on him, and so they throw him out of practice. Coach Smith, after practice, goes to him, says, Mac, is everything all right? Like, homesick? Like, and he's like, no, coach. And he's not looking at him. He's like, Mac, look at me when I'm talking to you. He's like, no, coach, I'm just not feeling. Mac, look at me as I talk to you. He said, coach, in my culture, to look an adult in the eye is
sign of disrespect.
It's sign of disrespect. So Coach Smith says, oh, okay. Walks out. Next day in practice, there's no Coach Guthridge. We threw him out of practice. Coach Guthridge's not there for a week. So Mac said he gets a call from his mom. She's like, Mac, there's this man here in Africa. Says he's your coach, assistant coach. I know it's Coach Smith. I don't know him well. He's been here for a week saying he's learning our culture. He sent Coach Guthridge to learn his culture so he can never make that mistake again. That's is deep. What Coach Smith is.
That's deep.
So it inspired us, Brian, to have a conversation about culture at Notre Dame and how it impacts the play of the players and how they feel off the field. And we said with the change in culture that Marcus Freeman has brought to the program, we focus so much on recruiting, but who on the current roster is going to improve from the change in culture? Who
and why?
Right. And it sparked us to have this conversation. It would be interesting to see, in the chat what IB Nation thinks about that as well. Who will improve on the field under new culture?
And the reason it's important is because the reality is I think Coach Kenny Smith went on to say, did he going to say, or this was you and I talked, but like when you do something like that for a kid, it's like there's nothing you can't ask of him moving forward.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that we've talked a lot about, and I know you've had conversations with former players, I've had conversations with former players, and the conversation was always, we did it for ourselves. We were the brotherhood. Notre Dame players for the last decade have talked so much about, especially the last 5 years, the brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
The brotherhood.
Yeah.
And that's fine and dandy. But at the end of the day, when you've got the brotherhood, well, so does Clemson. But Clemson also has a roster full of guys who would run through fire for Dabo.
Yeah.
Right? Out of respect. You have guys at Alabama that will run through fire for Nick Saban out of a different kind of respect.
Right.
The fear respect.
Yeah.
But also the fact that they think what he's asking him to do in the grumpy way he's asking him to do it, they believe that it's because it's going to make them better.
Yeah.
So 2 completely different personalities, it's the same result. That has not been the case in Notre Dame for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Long time. Since, I don't know, what year did Lou Holtz stop coaching in Notre Dame? That's how long it's been, where they had that kind of coach. And that's what we keep hearing about from players and parents and people around the program is we had an update about Michael Mayer and how Bama and some other schools were making a run at Michael Mayer, trying to convince him through the channels that they do to get in the portal. And one of the sources says, I think he might have considered it if Brian Kelly was still here.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, but the kid loves playing for Coach Freeman, a tight end. He doesn't even coach on offense.
Yeah.
Never's coached on offense.
Yeah.
A tight end. You hear receivers talk about it. You hear offensive linemen talk about it. And of course the defensive players talk about it because they got a taste of it last year when he was defensive coordinator. And that's the thing, Sean, is when you have the brotherhood that already exists, the player-driven culture that has existed for years at Notre Dame, and then you throw in a head coach who then puts an emphasis on hiring like-minded assistant coaches.
Yes.
Hey, Coach Mick, look what Coach Mick did at Cincinnati. I'm going to listen to him because I think, he cares about me, but he's got proven results.
Yes.
I know Coach Washington has my back. So when he tells me I need to do this, I'm going to trust him. And we know the culture that Harry Hiestand has created in that regard in the offensive line room. Same thing with Coach McCullough. Same thing with Coach Stuckey. You hear it over and over again, like, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. And then there's that connection with them where you actually think this guy gives a rip about you.
Right.
And so I think those things are incredibly important. And that's the culture change. So when we talk about that, it's about, I know Coach believes in me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for some players, that's going to have a big impact. And for me, Sean, to where we start this thing, we can't start anywhere but the quarterback room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think obviously we believe Tyler Buckner is going to be the starter, but it starts there.
Yeah.
It's the quarterback room. I think that's where you're going to see the culture change have the biggest impact, where you're not going to see Tyler Buckner throw a pick and immediately the head coach is greeting him 5 yards on the field, screaming at him. Right?
Yeah.
He's going to meet him 5 yards on the field.
Yeah.
And there's going to, but it's going to be a different. Now, it doesn't mean there's not accountability. It's just a different culture. When the guy getting in my face telling me I need to do better is someone that I know is going to go to war with me.
Yeah.
And has my back, then I'm going to react and respond to that in a completely different manner than if a different coach said the exact same thing in the exact same tone. So I think it starts at quarterback because that's the position that's been held back the most by the cultural problem that Notre Dame has had in the last decade.
And for that position, the calm and the confidence that Marcus Freeman gives to his players. And, one of the other guys I have on the list is a perfect example of that and why I feel he's going to perform better. But with Tyler Buchner, this is one of the things I watched yesterday. This morning. If you watch the Fiesta Bowl, and you sub in Tyler Buchner developed after spring into what Tommy Rees was trying to do, you see all of the openings, like the quick access passes, the RPOs, the big plays down the middle of the field of Micah Mayer and Lorenzo Styles. You see how Oklahoma State, because there was no threat of the run from Jack Cohn, could just crash off the ends and just totally mess up the run game. Teams can't do that with Tyler Buchner back there. So now the linebackers on the interior, it's more difficult for them to just be aggressive and come downhill. And you start to see the promise that can exist based upon the plays that Tommy Rees was calling for Jack Cohn. You're like, okay, I can see what can happen there if Tyler Buchner's the quarterback. So now we believe in the development of Tommy Rees. We have no choice, fans. Yeah, he's the guy. He's the offensive coordinator. He has been given the task of developing the quarterbacks in that room. All three guys. Get them ready to go on the field and win games. And we both believe with the top two that they can win 10 games with both in different ways, but they can win 10 games. And obviously the big games, Clemson, USC, and Ohio State to start it off, will be the tale of the tale of the entire story. But I say all of that to say this. Marcus Freeman gives the confidence to his coaches. See, I don't, Brian, I'm really not trying to go in certain directions. But when we talk about change in culture.
Well, it's hard because what was the culture defined by?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you as a player have to see, when you as a player see your coach, positional coach, mistreated,
right?
How does that make you feel? So now the flow of the message and being on one accord in the program is a totally different feeling.
I'm going to take it another level, Sean.
Okay.
I think the coaching part is correct. And you've heard me talk about how Jeff Quinn was treated.
Yeah.
Front of the players.
Yeah.
Not okay.
Yeah.
You've heard me talk about even Dell Alexander. Like, that's one of the issues. That's why Dell wasn't as successful at Notre Dame as he was at other places. You and I were talking yesterday about how Brian Kelly treated Mike Mickens last year. It's absurd. Like, it's like he would just pick a coach and crush him. But I think it goes back to, I remember watching a video. I can't remember what kind of video it was, but it was basically like how Bill Walsh would never dress down his quarterbacks in front of the team. Now, you get him in a closed room and he's going to have some words, but he would never dress down his quarterbacks in front of the team.
That's a totally different theory than what Bill Belichick chooses to do.
Correct.
But for Bill Walsh.
But when you're creating a culture, especially in college, when your quarterbacks get the treatment that they've gotten the last 10 years.
Yeah.
It's going to be like, man, like there's two ways to look at it. One is like, well, if the quarterback get ripped, I can too, which is like an accountability thing, but that's not the way, that's not what it turned into. It turned into like there just was like always a heavy cloud, like you're always worried, like, is this the day that I'm going to be the guy that gets destroyed? Is this the day that I'm going to get ripped? And I think that's, to me, it even goes beyond the position coaches. When you see the quarterback being treated the way that they have, and again, I'm all about accountability and high standards. And you see that the impact that it has on the quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I think that has an impact on the entire football team, especially the offense. And what's the side of the ball that's been the biggest problem? It's been the offense, because that's the side of the ball that Brian Kelly spent most of his time with. And that's where the culture, to me, was worst. Because I think they've been able to kind of, to a degree, fix it on defense to a degree.
Yeah.
Who are most of the guys talking about the brotherhood? Let's be honest. Who are most of those guys? Defensive players.
Yeah.
Because it's been allowed to grow and flourish over there much more so than on offense.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of it has to do with the quarterback. So that, to me, is it's not even like the scheme that Tommy Rees is going to call and freeing Tom Rees, like the chains have been broken from a play calling standpoint. It's not even about that. It's about when there's always has to be accountability in competition. But when there's not that constantly looking over your back, like I don't want to screw up because I don't want to have to deal with that.
Yeah.
That's where Ian Book freezes and won't throw the ball over the middle of the field. That's why Everett Golson steadily regresses during his career. Deshaun Kaiser steadily regresses during his career.
Yeah.
Tommy Rees, somewhat regresses during his career. Ian Book regresses and then stagnates during his career. As guys were longer into the system, they got worse and worse because you just don't want to make that mistake. And that's the biggest thing. I think that freeing of the quarterback position period to make a mistake, because the quarterbacks know the coach Rees has their back. So when he gets on him and it's like, rips him and stuff, it's like, I got you, coach, I'm going to do this. But then all of a sudden comes over, it's like if you're using a wrestling analogy, it's like some guy just comes off the top rope and you're not expecting it. It's like, it's going to shock you a little bit. Like, wait a minute, where'd that come from? You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's what it was. It was like, it was just walk around a corner, like, bam, there it is. Yap. And so I think to me, and I think the reason that's important, and I wanted to focus on that first, on it, because if the quarterback room is healthy from a mental leadership production standpoint, it just makes the whole offense better. It makes the whole football program better. Because look, here's the deal. Your team, whether you like it or not, the culture, the attitude of your team is going to be defined by your head coach, your quarterback, and your defensive captain. And when I mean defensive captain, I mean the guy that everybody looks to when the game is on the line.
Yes.
Not there's four guys that are captains.
Yes.
Right. But you know what I mean? And so when you look at the offense, it was very much a don't make a mistake. Don't make a mistake. Everybody was that way. Hey, we've never fumbled. We don't turn the ball over. Oh, yeah. You also don't make any plays.
Yeah.
Right. In big games, because everybody's so afraid to make a mistake that you go into these games and you score 14 against Bama, and then, it's late touchdowns in both games.
Right.
You know what I mean? You score 3 against Clemson because your offense is so afraid to make a mistake. And that's the culture that was created. Well, if once that's gone, you start to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to turn the ball over at some point in time. It's going to happen. No quarterback ever has not turned the ball over. But I'm going to take some chances too. And sometimes it's not going to work out. More often than not, it will. I think that's the biggest impact on this football team. I do. Especially because, Sean, you and I have a belief in Tyler Buckner's ability that if that freedom does come to be yourself, it's the biggest thing, be yourself, then, man, that's where you start seeing really big-time production. So I think for me, the quarterback position is where it starts.
To what you said, the relationships in that quarterback room, right? Because more than the regression at the position that we've seen over the last 10 years for multiple quarterbacks, there was almost a designed animosity planted in the quarterback room. And it wasn't planted by the players.
Right. Let's walk through this, Sean, because I think when you and I started talking names, I want to walk through this, and because I want to walk through this, then allow you to make your point, because I think it hits home.
Yeah.
It's happened every single time.
Yes.
Dane Chris, Tommy Rees.
Yes.
Tommy Rees, Everett Golson. Everett Golson, Malik. Malik, Deshaun. If Deshaun doesn't leave early and Malik doesn't transfer in the same offseason, it would have been the same thing with Brandon. That's the only exception, because 2 guys just left the program.
Yes.
Then it was Brandon and Book. And then it was Book and Jerkovic to a degree. That was the one exception, because he didn't necessarily have that same thing then, but he created in the reverse. It was with the backup that we saw that happen to, with Phil. And then this year with Jack and Tyler. And it's happened every single time where one guy gets pitted against another, and it just creates this, it's almost like that person who, in a funny term, remember Talladega Nights?
Yeah.
How they're at the Applebee's, and everything's good, and why don't you come to the class with me? And it's like, and he's like, I don't like this. It's like, it's too nice. Everything is good. Like, I don't, I got to blow it up.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some people thrive on chaos. They're just happy when there's chaos around them. And sometimes I've had to ask myself, is that what's going on at quarterback? And I want to point that out to lead into the point that you were going to make. Because I think when you hit it like that, you're like, wow, they've literally had that quarterback controversy every single time.
It's been consistent. And when you mention that, that's the one thing that I'm looking for. How is Tommy Rees going to handle the quarterback room? Like everyone else is talking X's and O's. For me, I'm going into fall camp watching how Tommy Rees handles the quarterback room. Is there a new way, a new culture being established in that room? Because he's been a part of it as a player. He's been a part of it as a coach.
Yeah.
He knows, and he knows what needs to change in order for that room to be more productive.
Yeah. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. And there was a great question that was asked, because I think it's very fair. Brandon Plensner says, do you think Marcus Freeman consistently saying he wants a quarterback that doesn't turn the ball over and that takes care of the ball will have the current quarterbacks afraid to take shots and take risks? And I think Jay Henry answered it perfectly, Sean. I don't think Free wants a quarterback that consistently puts the ball in harm's way, but he won't restrict Tommy's offense. And I think that response is really at the heart of the answer to that, Sean, is there is a way to take care of the football.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't a thing where, like, you're okay just going out there throwing 15 interceptions. It's more of the fear of making a mistake and what followed, right? And I'm not talking about jumping on a guy. I'm talking about there's a way. It's like you and I could both coach a position and say the exact same words, but the tone and the manner in which they are delivered and the threats that come behind them are going to determine, or lack of threats, are going to determine how they're perceived. And one is a very harsh way that doesn't really become productive. The other, it can be a harsh way that is productive. And then the other is you just don't correct mistakes and you allow it to happen because you don't hurt somebody's feelings. And that's just as bad as the other extreme.
Yeah.
It's set a level of accountability. But when a kid makes a mistake, what are you going to do? MF them, rip them, or are you going to teach them? And I think that's the key. Because, like, look, Harry Heastand is hard on guys. He does not tolerate mistakes. But he does it in a way where the kids understand where it's coming from, and then they want to go out there and get it right next time. There's not a fear. And I think that's the thing. That's a very fair question, because I don't think Marcus Freeman's going to be okay if Tyler Buckner goes out there and turns the ball over 3 times a game. Hey, but he made some plays. There's a healthy line for that, right? Like, if you watch the LSU offense in 2019, man, they took tons of shots. But he threw, like 6 interceptions that year?
Yeah.
This is about teaching. It's about having the freedom to do certain things, because when you're afraid, you're often late. And when you're late, that tends to lead to either mistakes or you just don't make the throw at all.
Yeah.
The freedom comes from, like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna make these plays. And I think that's the big key.
But along with that, that's the A part.
Mm-hmm.
When he said that. The B part is, he said, I want to be aggressive.
Right.
He said, now I don't want a quarterback that's going to turn the ball over. And I want to be able to run the ball and stop the run. But along with that, I want our team to be aggressive. I don't want to be tentative.
Mm-hmm.
So, for me, Nick Saban coaches the same way. Nick Saban constantly is on his quarterbacks about turning the ball over. And that is what team football is all about. Playing to your strengths as a quarterback, understanding, I have a great defense. It's 3rd and 7. We're up 10. It's the 4th quarter. Like, I might want to throw this deep ball, but I don't have to. I play to my team strengths. It's like getting a lead. Vince would probably love this. I know you don't really love the game. You get a leadoff double.
I love baseball. I don't like watching Major League Baseball.
Right. You get a leadoff double. What's your job?
Move the runner over.
Third.
Right. That's why I don't watch baseball anymore, because your job is now to walk or strike out or hit a home run.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love traditional baseball. Yes.
And a quarterback has to be intelligent like that to understand the strength of his team, play to that, take chances when it's there, be aggressive. But then there's sometimes where you read the game and say, you know what? In this situation, this is what we need to do, and be okay with throwing the ball away or walking away from a certain situation and knowing, hey, we're going to win the game. Because at the end of the day, to get stats, you want to win the game.
Do you ever wonder why Ian Book was so good in 2 minute? Think about that.
Yeah.
How many times? The one thing I'll give Ian Book credit for is going back to the LSU game.
Yeah.
The one time I ever looked back and said, man, he was consistently good in those situations.
Yeah.
It was late games where they needed a score. You look at LSU after 2017. You go look at, I mean, they weren't really in competitive. I mean, 2018, they kind of either dominated everybody, but the one game where Notre Dame struggled and needed plays to be made in the second half was Pitt. Remember that game?
Yeah.
And then you look at 2019, you look at Virginia Tech, the comeback there. And then 2020, I look at Clemson as an example. Whenever Ian Book got put in a 2-minute situation or, hey, we got to go make a play where, dude, you got nothing to lose, he was brilliant. Why? Because then it's like, we got nothing to lose. You got to make this play now. I can't have you be captain check down all game now. And he was brilliant in those moments. Throw the ball downfield, attack, be aggressive. I mean, the post route to Miles Boykin for the touchdown pass. And a lot of them included what, Sean? Deep balls. The one thing he would never use in normal situations, go routes against LSU, right? Post route against Pitt, post route against Clemson, doing the things he wouldn't do in normal situations. Why? Because the pressure is off now. We're losing or the game's tied. We got a minute and a half. We got to go.
Right.
And why was he so good then, but so mediocre in all those other instances? It's because, again, I think because that's when the pressure was off. Because if you make a mistake, we're down a touchdown. If you throw a pick, you throw a pick. Like we need to go out and can't punt this one. You can't punt this one away.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I thought about that, and I was like, that to me is further evidence of the problem that we've discussed at the quarterback position. Is why Ian Book was so afraid to throw the ball beyond 10 yards from the inside of the numbers inside for much of his career, especially in big games. But when it was a situation where the game was on the line, he went and did it. Yeah. I even think of like the Bama game where they were way down and he just went out and said, what the heck? It's my last game. I'm going to go out and just sling it. He's made some great throws, and you need to have that though at the beginning. And that's the difference. That's what Ohio State has. That's what Clemson has. That's what Bama has. That's what LSU had with Joe Burrow. And that's the key. But that's a cultural thing. That's a culture of your program thing, Sean.
Who would you say has the best quarterback culture in college football right now?
I'd probably say Ohio State. And the reason I say that is because there's been so much turnover at Alabama. It's I want to see kind of how Bill O'Brien does in year 2, but I think it's Ohio State. I mean, you've seen because it goes back to when Ryan Day was the OC as well.
Yeah.
You just seen the consistency of whoever they pop in. I mean, CJ Stroud had 0 career attempts going into last year, Sean.
Right. And his progression. Like if you watch that Minnesota game, you say to yourself, I don't know.
And he had some big misses. I mean, he put up good numbers, but he had some big misses against Oregon as well. Some big mistakes against Oregon as well.
But then you watch that same kid week 6, and it's like, whoa. This
never see Ryan Day destroying him on the sidelines or on the field.
No, never.
You do that on Tuesday. You do that on Wednesday. You don't do that on Saturday.
No. And the only thing that a great example of culture for a young man to come into is what we've talked about previously. I shared the story of Bryce Young talking about how upset he was when he found out Mac Jones was going to be the starting quarterback when he was a freshman. He thought he really was going to walk in and take that job as a true freshman. And one day he's watching film and one of the assistants lets him know, yo, you know why Mac is so good? Because he's watched every film in here twice. And Bryce Young said that's when it hit him that there's another level. Like that was culture impacting him, saying, you know what? I have to get to there. I have to put in the same work to be just as good. And so, maybe that's a culture that they're building to get to Ohio State.
I think that was more about just Mac Jones, though.
He started that, right?
Yeah, I think it was more about him and then Bryce, as opposed to the culture being created at the time. I don't think that Alabama's got a bad quarterback culture. They've had a ton of success. No. It's just I think Ohio State's is more head coach driven. than
talent driven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where Bama's offense has just always had great players.
Yeah.
You know, but I'd probably go to Ohio State. It's probably, not, especially since David Cutcliffe is not at Duke anymore, you know what I mean, or in college football anymore. I'd probably go.
That would be another great culture. Yeah.
What's your number 2, Sean? As you kind of look around and you look at the different positions, I think there's 2 other positions that I think are important for that too. What is your number 2? Or position, player? What it could be players within the position, whatever the case. Where you want to go next with this?
Oh boy, I forgot. Wait a minute. Let me look at the rundown.
I know one you said to me the other day was Clarence Lewis.
Can I go somewhere else first?
Of course,
because I think we agree. Do we agree on Clarence Lewis?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we do. I mean,
so
we agree him as a player. You hope he gets beat out and everything, but the point is he's going to bounce back. From his late season struggles because of the manner in which Marcus Freeman has handled his bad game. Same with DJ Brown.
Right. Same thing.
Right. Yes. Their confidence should have got destroyed by how bad they played in that game, but it hasn't been because the head coach had their back. Now you know that they were corrected and told they didn't play well.
Yeah.
But there's a difference in that being held accountable and being destroyed.
I have a question mark next to a name. I'm interested in seeing what you think about it. Braden Lindsey was my second guy.
Yes.
And my example for that was having the opportunity to go to one of their open practices and sitting there, and they were working on zone combinations. It was pretty much 7-on-7. They were working on zone combinations and communications on the defensive side of the ball and passing guys off within the zone. And on the offensive side, they were working on that quick screen game and like faking the quick screen and attacking down the field. And they threw a quick screen or a screen pass, I believe, to Jaden Thomas. And Jaden Thomas ended up picking up 10 yards from the play. Good play. And everybody's like, okay, nice play. And all of a sudden you see someone running like directly at Braden Lindsey. And it's Chancey Stuckey, and he's in his ear hole. And he's like, if you make that block, that's a touchdown. And he's giving it to him. And I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know if this wide receiver core has been coached like this. So now he's like, you're the senior. You're the leader. If you play like that, they're going to play like that. In front of I need you to step up. You have to make that play. And the accountability you talked about that I saw in that moment, I think is going to bode very well for Braden Lindsey. I think he's going to take up and he's going to take the challenge.
I think he wants to be believed in, Sean.
Yes.
I think, and part of believing in me is not just when you're mad at me, brushing me off or benching me or putting me in the back of the line,
which has been done a lot in his career.
But saying, Braden, you're better than
you're
that.
Better than this.
I need more from you.
Yeah.
And if you drop a ball, make a mistake, I'm going to get on you.
That's fine.
But I'm going to put you right back out there. Now, if you keep doing it, then that's when you get benched, right?
That's another thing. Yeah.
I think that's a great point. And I think that's to me an even better example of the coach culture that you talked about with Marcus Freeman.
Yeah.
Where Chancey Stuckey under Brian Kelly isn't allowed to run down the field and go after him because he's already getting his butt ripped by Brian Kelly.
Yes.
So I can't go, coach, because you're ripping me to make some point about, whatever. And that's part of it too.
Don't make me fan myself in here, Brian.
Do what you got to do, buddy. So I think that's an important thing where Marcus Freeman has brought in people that are going to create a level of accountability. This is the standard that we have set. It's the golden standard. You got to live up to it. That means working hard, doing this, executing, all those things.
Yeah.
And if you don't live up to it, I'm going to be on you.
Yeah.
But I still love you. I still got your back. I'm still going to coach you up hard every single day. And that's the key. Because what do kids learn in football from a very early age? When they stop yelling at you, they stop coaching you, it means they don't care anymore.
They don't care. Yeah.
And that's kind of, I remember I was telling the story one time about Terry Joseph. They had an injury in camp and Derek Allen's out there playing. Derek makes a couple plays, made one mistake, but then made a couple plays. And as he's running off the bench, because Derek's a smart kid, he starts running towards Terry Joseph, and Terry Joseph looks at him and just goes, didn't speak to him. And then you wonder why he transferred 3 days later.
Yeah.
And you just wouldn't coach him. The kid was a freaking redshirt freshman.
Yeah.
Just wouldn't coach him. How he would then go and I was told about this meeting where they were going over some stuff, and he took Kyle Hamilton off to the side and was going over with him while Litchfield Agevon and Derek Allen and all these other kids are over there like, okay, what are we doing?
What are we doing?
DJ Brown, and it's just like, okay, whatever. That's a crappy culture. I would have loved to see what would happen if Chris O'Leary or Mike Mickens or Al Washington or Chancey Stuckey tried to do that now.
Yeah.
Would love to see that conversation because you're not going to stand for that.
No.
And a lot of the Notre Dame coaches I just don't think are that way. Most of the Notre Dame coaches, like Mike Elson, was not like that. You didn't have to hold Mike Elson accountable because he wasn't like that. Mike Elson always coached the entire depth chart.
Right.
Especially the last go round when he moved back to D-line. So, I mean, but not every coach is that way or knows how to be that way. And it's your job as a head coach to make sure that you understand. I don't care if you don't want to coach those other kids. That's your freaking job. I'm not paying you this amount of money to coach 2 guys.
Yeah.
I'm paying you some money to coach 10. And I think that's that culture thing, yes.
What stood out to me on that particular example I talked about, not allowing your guys to be satisfied.
Right.
Like you said, Braden Lynn, you should not be satisfied with what you've done to this point.
Right.
You're better. There's more in you, and I'm going to help you pull it out of you. I'm going to get it out of you.
Right. Because how can you expect a kid like Braden Lindsay, who's got to come through injuries and all these other kind of things, and he's not the biggest guy in the world, how are you going to expect that kid to battle through all these different things and give you his best when he doesn't think you – and I'm not speaking for Braden Lindsay. I don't know if he believes this or not. I'm just going off what I saw.
Yeah.
You just read his body language at times, and you're just like – and it wasn't just him. It was a lot of those kids. Like they don't act like kids who now some of them did. Like Chase Claypool was just that kind of guy. I mean, just it's just how he was. But like these, it's like I think that's why Kevin Austin struggled in those big moments because he didn't have faith in himself. And if your coach don't have faith in you, you're not going to have faith in yourself more often than not.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. The kids are going to make those big catches. They're going to make that block. I remember like one of the best receivers I ever coached. Like I knew the light went on for him. I mean, this kid had over 50 catches, over 1,000 yards, 14 touchdowns in 1 year. But I knew that the light had gone on when he would make me stop in the film session and rewind to go watch him block a dude off the field.
Yeah.
Like, okay, the light's going on. He gets it. He knows what the standard is. But the reason he listened to it is because he knew that when I was telling him to go block, it's because I was trying to raise his level of excellence and that kind of thing. But he also knew that I was going to be harder on him than anybody else.
Yeah.
But it's because I cared. And I think that's the different thing is I don't know. Kids, when you get into a game, the brotherhood can only take you so far, man. That's what it comes down to, especially when you get in games against the big boys.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why you look at a guy like Braden Lindsay and say, I do think as long as he's healthy, this could be that year for him because the pressure of if I go drop a ball, I'm done. If I go do it, I'm done. I think that's gone to a degree. It doesn't mean that Tommy Rees is going to tolerate guys not making plays. Yeah. It's just, it's different. I think that's a good one, Sean. I like that one. I'm going to go on the other side of the ball with my next one honestly. And I'm going to go linebacker. Okay. And I feel like the culture at linebacker has sort of evolved over the last year too. Cause I think, and it's not just a Brian Kelly thing, but I think the way Clark Lee was as well. Yeah. This isn't a knock on Clark Lee. It's just different. Yeah. It was so finite. And so it's got to be this exact way. And this is how, and no freelance. And this is your, to where, and then if you make mistakes, how some guys were held to a certain standard and other guys weren't held to the same standard. That's one of the worst things you can have in a program. It's like, wait a minute, why are you always getting on me about that, but you're not getting on that guy about that? That's where you can really tear a locker room apart. Yeah. And you'd hear about that stuff. So I think that now that players know, look, you can't just you can't be 2 gaps off on this play. You've got to be disciplined. But at the same time, you've got a culture and started last year. And I think Al Golden's going to take it to another level of, yes, you have your responsibility to play, but what's the number one objective? Get to the ball.
Yes.
Right? Like within the framework of what we're doing, get to the ball. And I think that the previous system held back a player like Marist Liufau. Because Marist needed the structure of Clark Lee for a while.
Yeah.
But then I think it went too far. And I think part of the reason he was so good early in fall camp last year is because he benefited from the discipline, but I think the discipline kind of froze him at times. I think this is what hurt Shane Simon and some of the other guys, and why a guy like Drew Pine thrived so much, because Drew thrived on just tell me where to go, and I'm going to do it perfectly. I think a guy like Marist Liufau needs that culture of hey, I believe in you, and so we're going to give you freedoms.
Yeah.
And if you make a mistake, I'm going to get on you, but we're not going to destroy you, right?
Right.
And I think you need that at linebacker. I mean, you need a guy that's willing to say, yeah, I know I'm supposed to do this, but I remember on the scouting report, this is what I'm going to see, and I'm going to take this chance. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make that play. I mean, you'd see Jalen do that in games.
Yeah.
You'd see Jalen's like, I don't think that's what he was supposed to do.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because like you just see how the rest of the defense went. I was like, I don't think that's what he's supposed to do. And I've heard that about him. I've heard that about Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. They're like he did not. That was not even remotely what he was supposed to do on that play. But he just would. And then Clark, I heard Coach Lee would get mad at him sometimes too for that. Like, and to a degree, you've got to do that. But like that was an issue with Alohi Gilman. He would be like, he'd go make a play and then he'd get in trouble. It's like, well, why am I in trouble? Well, you're supposed to. He goes, I know I'm supposed to do this, but I studied the film, I read the play, and I knew this is where they're going with the ball.
Yeah.
But I told you to do this. Okay, fine, bench me. You know what I mean? If you know what I mean, like
you feel that badly about it,
right? Go ahead, bench me. Put somebody else in, right? Yeah. And you can't have that, right?
No.
But I also say the counter to that is, but if that's the defense you're playing in, then you need to do what the coach tells you to do.
Yeah.
But that's why I think the culture of what Marcus Freeman's bringing, of the belief system combined with a system that says this is your responsibility, but see ball, get ball, right? And where you're going to have that freedom where, you guy, remember, why did you do that? Coach, this is why I did this. That's actually one of the proud moments for a defensive coach, where you bring him off the field and you're like, okay, you did this. You weren't supposed to do this. Yeah, it worked out, but why did you do it? Right? Because you need to make sure he didn't accidentally luck into a big play. Like,
right.
Thank God they were running right there because I did it.
Right.
He said, well, Coach, I saw this. I saw that the X receiver had reduced his splits, and I saw this, and I knew when they do this that they're running this route. And so that's why I did this. That's that proud pop-up moment as a coach.
No.
Like, okay, we prepared him. You know what I mean? Like, even though that's not the call I made, we prepared him. He knew it was coming. He went and made a play.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see more of that on defense. And that's kind of where the issue was last year's. Guys would get kind of caught between the old system and what Marcus Freeman wanted, so they wouldn't go make a play. And next thing you know, there's this hole opening up.
Good point.
Because he's expecting you to hey, you see it, go do it.
Yeah.
But they're like, but wait a minute, I'm supposed to have B gap on this play.
Right.
And so that's why I think the linebacker production took a huge step back last year, because Marcus Freeman's defense requires you to kind of have a bit of a go sniff that sucker out.
Yeah.
And where Clark Lee's defense was do this. And I think that's why I think linebacker as a whole, but especially Marist Liufau, is going to really benefit from the culture change. Because it's not just about the scheme change, Sean. You also have to know that, okay, this is what they want. They want me to be a playmaker, and they're going to believe in me and give me the freedom to do that. And I think that's going to be an important piece of that as well. So that's my other one. That's my main one on defense for me is Marist. I think that's a big reason why Marist is going to have a monster year as long as he can stay healthy. I'm not sure how you feel about that one.
My question, I agree wholeheartedly with you. My question, I was thinking Jason Ademiyola.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why. I think Jason was asked to do a lot of things. Or I don't think Jason was always put in the best position.
Yeah.
To do what he does best.
Attack.
Right? And I think the culture change comes from not playing favoritism, understanding what's best in the rotations and what needs to happen, and also the opening up of the roster. This is what I mean by this. I think it was another previous show. I don't know if it was you and I or you and Ryan or Vince, but you talked about when Clarence Lewis struggled. First of all, Clarence Lewis was put in there before he was ready due to the lack of recruiting the previous years. He should have been able to develop. He was put in there early, had some success, but just like anybody else, you're going to face adversity. And when you face it, if you're not equipped how to deal with it and overcome it, you're going to struggle. And we saw that with Clarence Lewis last year. For me, the overall change in culture and 1A, 1B that Marcus Freeman has been talking about, I think is going to make a guy like Jason Ademilola better. I won't even go to the X's and O's and what Al Golden is going to do and how he might unleash him on the defensive line. I just want to talk about the field. Him. You were there. Well, you weren't able to be there. Myself and Ryan and Vince were there.
Just rub it in, Sean. Rub it in.
I'm sorry, bro. But the most vocal person in the entire practice facility was Jason Ademilola.
Wasn't even allowed to practice.
And he was on the sideline.
Right.
He was on the sideline in sweatpants.
That's the culture part that's a change.
Absolutely. And that is the person that everyone is going to look to.
Right.
When you talked about, it's got to be your quarterback, coach, quarterback, and that guy on the defensive side of the ball. I don't know if he's going to be. I think between him, Brandon Joseph, and Maris, they're pretty good with like leadership. And Isaiah Foskey
I think it's going to be Jason and Justin more than anybody else because they're the most willing to get in somebody's face.
I agree.
But this is where the culture part comes in for me. And this is where I agree with you. I think Jason's going to be a more productive player because he's pissed off that he's getting disrespected, right? And I think the defensive system is allowing him to attack more.
Yeah.
So I think the production is going to be more of a scheme related. I think his leadership is going to improve because of the cultural change in that.
Yeah.
Hey, look, this is your team, fellas. Right? At the end of the day, this is your team.
Yeah.
You're the one that polices the locker room. You're the one that polices the dorms. You're the one that polices who's doing what on Thursday night and Friday night before a game. That's on you. And you have to have guys that are willing to get in your face as a player and say, nope. We got some things we're trying to do here, and you're keeping us from doing that.
Yeah.
And Jason and Justin especially, and there were times where I believe guys like that had it tamped down a little bit. Hey, that's my job. I'm the coach. You can't have that. Now, do you want players talking over coaches? No. But I doubt that's what was happening in that situation, right? Where he's not coaching the kid up and talking over Al Washington or contradicting Al Washington. It's This is my role. And I'm going to do it. Coach is over here talking to this guy, so I'm going to grab this guy and tell him what needs to be told, what needs to be said. And I think those are the things that are very important. That I don't know if there was that ability. It's like some guys is where they're going to be. Like Quentin Nelson was going to be that way, whether you want him to or not. But he was also playing within a smaller subculture that was much healthier. Because that's the thing is we've had some subcultures that have been healthy at Notre Dame over the years.
I agree.
Because of the position coaches.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the defense has been better on the field is because, with Mike Elko first and then Clark Lee to a degree, I think Mike Elko is better at establishing that culture and Clark Lee just kind of maintained it but that we've seen some subcultures within it. But big picture, there's now not only a freedom, but an expectation for leaders to step up and do what you need to do. And again, your number one job is to go play and execute, but then your number two job with certain players is to, if it's your personality, hey, I can't be out on the field all for you. I can't. Somebody's got to step up on 3rd and 5 and get in people's face or make the right check or make the right call or have the freedom to say, hey, look, I know this isn't what you told us to do, but this is what I saw, and I had the guts to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas like now that goes back to the quarterback thing. Like I'm not going to make that check. I'm going to do exactly the checks you told me to do, because a quarterback that really knows the offense and is in the right kind of culture, Sean, is going to say, I'm going to use a personal example because I'm going to get pissed off. But basically, where, hey, this was the checks you told me to make, but based on the film study we watched, I thought we had this.
Yeah.
And be like, okay, I get it. Here's what I'd rather you do. Or you can say, F that, get in the back, right? Or you don't want to hear it or whatever the case may be. I mean, you just see just sort of like every time something didn't go right on offense, you just saw this insanity of, this. It wasn't good. So I think those are the positions I look at and say, this is where the culture is really going to have an impact.
And to bring it full circle, when I use Clarence Lewis, I think he'll be better because now the guys behind him are ready to go.
Right.
And now there's added depth. And it's more about us collectively. And I think along the defensive line, I think now they can just unleash Jason. Go get it. Go be you. Be the disruptor.
Mm-hmm.
Get to the quarterback. Get tackles for loss. Get in that backfield. Because if you have to come off the field, we got you.
Mm-hmm.
We got a guy behind. You're good. Collectively, we're going to get this done. I think all of that, the change in culture. And I would be interested. It's something else I saw along the defensive line because Al Washington is just as beloved, it seems like, as Mike Elston was by his defensive lineman.
Mm-hmm.
Similar relationship. They love him. But I remember Al Golden is so hands-on, and Marcus Freeman has talked about this, like listening to him teach.
That's the key.
And the way he delivers things, to see the light bulbs go off in his players. We know Notre Dame has smart football players, but you don't want them to be so smart that they play slow.
Right.
I hope I explained that right.
No.
Because I think that's what you were saying about Maris. Like,
can't think too much. You gotta just you gotta have the freedom to go play, but also the structure to know what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But then not get so much put into your head that you freeze. It's a balancing. I think that's where his NFL background is key because he's been dealing with professionals for several years now.
Yes.
And you don't treat professionals that way anymore. Because nowadays, you're a position coach in the NFL, you're literally the lowest paid dude in the room.
Yeah.
And you're way more expendable than your star linebacker or your second round draft pick or whatever. Way more expendable if you're a position coach. But you still want to be successful and you want to teach and you want to be good at what you do. So you treat them like men. And you can treat men harshly and with accountability. And like respect and harshness aren't polar opposites.
No.
If they're coming from, and that's just in Harry Heastan and Brian McGorder, right?
Yeah.
Harsh, a-hole, guy that's beloved.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that, but I think that's where because he's. I mean, because I get the videos you guys sent, and you can just hear him. It's teaching. It's vocal. It's set. There's a high standard, but I'm teaching. Marcus Freeman hired a bunch of good teachers.
Yes.
Not just coaches, but good teachers.
Yes.
And I think that's where the culture part is really, really important. Is like, because I'm not here to intimidate you and scare you into doing the right thing.
Yes.
I'm here to teach you. And that's what people often don't get about Harry Heastan. They hear about the yelling and the cussing, and they don't realize that all of it is involved with teaching.
Great teacher. Yes.
Yes. That's why the players love him and why they play well. And the other yellers don't necessarily get that, and they don't get the same respect. And the other part of it too, can I say the last part of it too?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Because I think we can talk about specific players, but here's why I think at the end of the day, the change in culture and the different type of head coach is going to matter because you cannot be the way the previous head coach was if you're not around. Because the players are not going to believe that you have their back when it's not the season, you're not around. They don't see you. You're not invested. You're not involved in their lives. Those things just don't happen. And the fact that Marcus Freeman was a coordinator and position coach before he became head coach, and the players have been to his house, they've met his children. He has them around at practice all the time. Like we're doing post-spring practice, film interviews, and I'm on Zoom, and I'm hearing these children running around. I'm like, whose kids are these? It's Freeman's. It's the other coaches, because it's like that. He's talked about one of the best things I heard him say. Why do you have your kids at practice? Because I want these kids on the team to see me as a father also.
Yes.
Not just a head coach. I want them to see me as a husband also. And then I'm going to hold you to, hey, you know what? You know why you're getting suspended for how you treated that girl and the whatever? It's because you've seen how we demand that you treat women around here.
Mm-hmm.
We've set that standard. Look how I interact with Katie. Look, the SID. Look how we interact with the trainers. Look how we interact with our wives and our children. That's what we're expecting from you.
Yes.
That's the level of respect. And so that's the thing that it was all football before. There was not an open door policy for the, and I'm not trying to take shots at, this is just reality.
We're talking about the culture.
Truth.
We're talking about the culture.
Right? And when you don't think I can go to this guy or he's got my back, you will take a butt chewing from any as a young male athlete. I had a father in my life.
Yeah.
But I still took butt chewings from coaches because when I was away from my dad, they were sort of not the father figures per se, but they were the people that were invested in helping me develop as a man. And you can help develop me as a man as a football player as well, if you believe in them, right? So you'll take that butt chewing if you know what's behind it is I think you can be great. I think you can be successful. Yes. I'm going to hold you to standard, but you know what? When we get away from the football field, I'm going to also love you as a young man.
Right.
And that's what's changed. So that's where Chancey Stuckey can bring just as much of an impact as how he's teaching stance, start, stem, top ends, ball skills, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's that he also coach prays over me. He's encouraging me. He's getting on my butt about my academics. He's getting on my case about this. But it's because he wants me to be successful, right? And it's not just about make sure you're eligible. It's about make sure you're doing the best that you can and being the best man you can be. That's the culture change too, Sean. But you can't do that if you're not there all the time. And that's the thing. You got to be there. And so far, again, it's much easier to do in your first year as a coach, right? The key is going to be, can Coach Freeman be that guy in 3, 4, 5, 6 years when the pull to go speak here and speak there and do this and do that becomes even greater? That's where it becomes a challenge, is after about year 4 and 5, when you've had some success, like with Coach Holtz. It becomes, the people pulling for your attention is even greater.
Yeah.
But, right now, that's one of the things that's really enhanced the culture too.
And let me just point out, well said, I don't need to add anything to it, but it becomes infectious.
Yeah.
You know how infectious it becomes? We know the guys that were scheduled to be visitors this weekend. But why is Brandon Davis Swain in South Bend this weekend?
Right. Why is CJ Carr on campus?
How does CJ Carr end up there this weekend?
Right.
There's like 5 or 6 players that weren't even scheduled to be. Why is Drake Bowen leaving immediately after his semifinal game this afternoon to drive from Kokomo to South Bend just to make it in time for dinner?
Mm-hmm.
It's the culture. It's what Marcus Freeman has brought to this program. And the reaping that they're doing from what they've sown and establishing this new culture, you can see it right now. And you can see and project in 2024. You can see and project what 25 is going to be like. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing time. And we talked about this jokingly, right? This is literally, I started in January. I couldn't have picked a better time.
You and Ryan lucked out big time
to jump on board.
You did.
The best time to jump on board. And it's an amazing time to be a fan.
So Sean, let's kind of get into this and we'll be brief because this is going to be more of your thing.
Yeah.
I want to talk about sort of your thoughts. I know you watched the show.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts when we talk about kind of putting together the ultimate Notre Dame schedule? Obviously, beginning with the 5-game ACC. That's the reality. That's the reality we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Who would your rivals be? What would your overall scheduling philosophy? So let's just kind of start there. So Notre Dame's rivals right now are USC, Navy, and Stanford. Mm-hmm. Do you keep all 3 or do you drop somebody?
I would drop. You know what? Let me change that. Let me change that. You just said that, and I love tradition and why Notre Dame has done things the way they've done it as far as the Pac-12. So I'm going to keep USC and Stanford.
Okay.
Right? Navy has to be on the schedule. Has to be. So I broke it down. I would play the 5 ACC games, USC, Stanford, Navy. And out of the 4 remaining games, I would do a Shamrock Series game that will be dependent upon recruiting and where I want to hit. Like I would play a game in Jerry's World for sure down in Texas.
You got to almost do like once every 4 or 5 years.
Absolutely. And then it would be the opponent would be decided about, based upon recruiting and the region and who I want to play in that area and the big venue. Then I would want 2 Big Ten teams. This is just me. I just always love.
Said 2 Big Ten teams.
2 Big Ten teams. I just love when they went back to back Michigan State the way they used to in the past. Right?
Or Purdue, Michigan State, Michigan Purdue.
State. Right. Yeah, one game will be home, the next one will be on the road.
Right.
I think it's great for college football. I think it's great for the Midwest, and I'm all for that. So that would be 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. You got the Shamrock, and then I will leave one open to like the SEC.
Okay. So you're going back to the old scheduling. So no MAC teams, no.
No, at this point with the expansion, I think you can take more chances with your schedule with the eventual expansion coming up where it's going to 8 teams. When they open it up, it makes things easier for Notre Dame. It does. So I would go 5 ACC, keep USC and Stanford because I want that West Coast trip at the end of November. Navy has to be on the schedule, right? So the Shamrock Series, that will be 9, and the opponent is to be determined. And 2 Big Ten games, and then I will open it up for like 1 SEC team or a Big 12 team.
Okay.
Whoever you want to play. Or it could be a team like Cincinnati was this past season.
Okay.
If you have a team that's non-Power 5.
Or maybe that would fit your Shamrock Series type of thing too.
Yep, okay. That could as well.
So let me ask you this question, Sean. When you look at the Big Ten, you said you want to play 2 Big Ten games a year. You talk about tradition. Yeah. Would it be kind of like sticking to like a smaller group of Big Ten schools that you have? So would it be like, I'm going to play 2 of Michigan State, Purdue, that kind of thing, Penn State, Northwestern, or would you try to rotate some new teams in there?
I'm Notre Dame, right? So I'm going to treat this like I'm a boxing promoter. It has to be worth it for us. We're a big brand. In some way, the matchup has to be worth it. Like Wisconsin at Lambeau and Soldier Field, that was worth it.
Right.
And Wisconsin's a really good program.
Right.
A home and home, going to Happy Valley, coming to South Bend, that's worth it.
Right. And there's some tradition there.
And there's some history there because they played.
In the 80s and 90s, yeah.
Yeah, I would probably stick to a small pool of schools, right? Ohio State, Penn State. At this point in time, Michigan can go somewhere. Michigan State, Ohio State, Penn State, and then the West, I would probably say Wisconsin. Purdue's in the East, right?
No, they're in the West.
They're in the West. So I would go Wisconsin, Purdue. It has to be worth it. Like if another program elevates, and like if Brett Bielema elevates Illinois in the next 4 to 5 years, okay.
Right.
That's Soldier Field.
There's no value in playing Illinois if they're not really, really good.
Absolutely.
And even then, it's like, you're still supposed to beat Illinois.
But I'm going to be
same
honest
with Indiana.
I'm going to be honest with you. If he can get them to the level of Wisconsin,
right,
which is Wisconsin basically recruits Illinois players.
Yeah.
And Wisconsin.
A lot.
So it can be done.
Well, with Illinois too, Sean, if Brett Bielema gets them to that level, that means they're going to start doing better in Chicago.
Absolutely.
And, your little yapping neighbor starts kind of coming up and taking some of your stuff, you gotta okay, let's schedule. You got to smack you down a little bit.
Smack them down.
Exactly.
I mean,
I get it.
Just in the 23 class where they sit with Jair Hill was a kid that Notre Dame was on, and Malik Elzy. Just those two kids. If they get those two kids,
Notre Dame didn't push for them, and they're not like they did Caden Fingan. But the point is, you start getting those kids, then you start winning games.
Right.
Then you might actually beat Notre Dame and Ohio State and Michigan for a kid or two.
Right.
And that's when it's like, you can't afford to lose Chicago kids to Illinois, man.
Yep,
and if they're winning the West and all that. You know what's surprising to me? I don't remember anyone. Ryan definitely did, or Vince definitely didn't do it, and I don't remember any of the chat doing it either. I'm really surprised that nobody has talked about, and I'm not a supporter of it, but I just thought that it would naturally make sense. Nobody talked about scheduling Nebraska.
Well, that's a team from the Big Ten West. If they can, if Frost can get them back to a point,
right?
Yeah, I would.
It's just kind of interesting that wasn't a team that people thought. I mean, I'd schedule them every now and then for a home and home, but it's just surprising me that nobody would do that. So here I was actually a little surprised that instead of dropping Stanford, because like what I did, Sean, is I dropped Stanford and replaced them with Michigan State. That's my new rival. So I'm still going to have three rivals, but I'm just bringing back an old rivalry.
Yeah.
Because the Stanford rivalry didn't really start till like the 90s. I think like the late 80s, 90s is when they started playing. I think they didn't start playing them every year until like 98.
The rivalry didn't start until Bill Walsh walked in here and beat Notre Dame.
Didn't Dennis Green beat him once too?
You're right.
Bill Walsh beat him that early in Holtz's tenure. I think Dennis Green beat him once too. But as far as rights, they didn't start playing each other every year until the late 90s.
Yeah.
So that's why it doesn't really
I just kept, you could kick Stanford out, and if they can find another Pac-12 team that can be that late November game when USC comes here.
So that was going to be my question for you, Sean, was would you be willing to consider keeping three rivals, but adding a Big Ten team, a Purdue because like what I did is I went Michigan State. Vince went Michigan State, Purdue in a rotation as your third rival.
Yeah.
And then instead of a third Big Ten team, so you don't keep the two Big Tens, take one Big Ten that rotates and then one Big Ten rival, and then take that second spot to try to find a Pac-12 rotation. We're going to play Arizona State. We're going to play, UCLA. We're going to play Washington as the second Pac-12 every year. And then, of course, you'd be opposite of whatever you're doing with USC, you'd play that other team differently. Would you be open to that?
Yeah.
Because I just don't see what value Stanford brings. Like Stanford only brought value for a very short period of time.
They're just on the West Coast. They're just on the West Coast.
Right.
And that gives you the second option for a Pac-12 team. That's right. That's really it.
Somebody said, when was the last time Stanford sniffed the Natty? I'd argue 2015.
Yeah, when they lost to Oklahoma State.
No, that was the year that they should have made. Honestly, in 2015, Stanford didn't make the playoff because they had two losses. But by the end of the year that year, they were really one of the four best football teams with Christian McCaffrey that year.
You're right.
But 2011 team, that was a really good Stanford team, and took an Oklahoma State team that I thought should have played for the title that year down to the wire.
Yeah, they did. That was a great bowl.
Yeah. One of the best I've ever seen. Yeah. Andrew Luck against Brandon Whedon. that was a phenomenal game. But they lost to Northwestern early the year. Remember they started the season off with that weird loss to Northwestern?
Yeah, that was a weird loss.
And then they climbed all the way back up to 7 and then lost to Oregon in a 2-point loss. And then got back up to number 7. They beat Notre Dame. They were 13 and they beat Notre Dame, who's number 4. And then they jumped up to 7. But to me, you played in a Rose Bowl game of 5 versus 6 and you absolutely obliterated the number 5 team. That was the team that was in that conversation. But I think 2011 Stanford would have been a team that I would have said considered it, because that was still, I believe, polls could still give titles out to the team that didn't win the BCS game.
Yeah. And
Stanford went into that postseason ranked 4th, and Oklahoma State was 3rd, and their only loss was against Oregon. But my thing about that 2011 Stanford team is, Sean, is I could have seen a team a poll giving Stanford the number one if they would have beat Oklahoma State, because there were some people that were pissed that Alabama was even playing for the title that year because they had lost at home to LSU.
LSU, yeah.
And then you got to have a rematch in a neutral field. It's not that you lost LSU at LSU. Like, why does LSU have to do a rematch against you? They went to your place and beat you. Why do you now get another crack at them on a neutral field? And so I could have seen that year, that Stanford team potentially being that. But I thought they should have done that with Oklahoma State too.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. I mean, because that Oklahoma State team was interesting because, remember, the only loss they had that year was late at Iowa State. And that was like right after there was that plane crash that had killed some people that were in the some coaches and like some athletic department. It was like a real big, and they had to play it was like a Thursday night. That game should not have been played.
Yeah.
And they lost. But I mean, you look at how they played in every other game, like that game was such a weird anomaly, and it was a lot due to the circumstances of it. So anyway, that was kind of my thoughts. But Stanford, whether they sniffed a natty or not, at the end of the day, Sean, from about 2010 to about 2018, when you beat Stanford, you were beating a team that was going to be ranked and sometimes ranked high. I mean, the 2012 win over Stanford flat out gave that Notre Dame team in 2012 the confidence they can play with anybody. I mean, the 2015 Stanford team that had given you a top 10 victory. I mean, you know what I mean? So, like, I'm good dropping Stanford now, but I'm not going to disrespect the value that they brought to your schedule because they were the bellwether. If you can't beat Stanford, then you're clearly not that good of a program. And up until really 2018, Brian Kelly struggled mightily against Stanford.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
They're just not there now. Like, if Marcus Freeman goes out and runs 5 straight wins over Stanford, I'm not going to be like, see, he's a better coach than Brian Kelly. Well, that's not the Stanford team that Brian Kelly was facing his first 5 years. Like, Brian Kelly
totally different.
Brian Kelly's facing a juggernaut Stanford early in his tenure. Marcus Freeman's not doing that. So, but now it's just the point now where they don't take football seriously. That's my issue.
Yeah.
It's not even that they're down, Sean, because they weren't that good in the 90s. They weren't, but you still played them. They had a team here, a team there. But like that Bill Walsh team that smacked Notre Dame that one year, that was not a ranked Stanford team. They ended up becoming ranked.
Yeah.
But they weren't a ranked Stanford team. So for me, it's just that they don't take football seriously anymore. And that's my issue. Like, they just don't support the program. And I just don't see what value that brings to you anymore at this point in time.
All right.
So that's that.
Ready for my non-ACC?
Yes.
All right.
Because this is where it gets really, because you got a lot more to play with now. Here's my first question.
But my rivals are different with
how many rivals do you have and who?
4.
Oh, okay. I went 4 as well.
I went 4. If we're doing non-ACC.
Mm-hmm.
Navy.
Okay.
USC. The Big Ten rival, which would be Michigan State, Purdue.
Okay.
Like you said. And we got to play Boston College, man.
Okay.
You got to play Boston College.
Okay.
They're Notre Dame.
So you would rotate Michigan State and Purdue? Like, in over 10 years, you're going to play one of those teams in that slot?
It would be Michigan State, Purdue. And then I would be very comfortable with Wisconsin becoming a rival.
Okay.
I would be really comfortable with that.
Okay. So you got your 4 rivals. How else do you go through making out your schedule?
So I'm going to have the 2 Big Ten games. I'm going to have the 2 ACC games. One would be BC. And then I would do one in the DMV area because that's my pipeline for recruiting.
So basically, you're going to play Virginia, Virginia Tech.
Yeah, Virginia Tech. And I would extend that to like North Carolina.
Yeah, the Carolinas up to, yeah.
Yeah, because they're hitting the Carolinas recruiting. Look, Christian Hamilton, Jack Larson. They just got Jalen Sneed from South Carolina. So, yeah, I would definitely hit that area and schedule a game there. Then I would go, USC would be one game, and I would probably schedule another Pac-12 team. I would be interested in doing a home and home with, because we've done this before, right? I think we had Did we go to Utah? I know Utah came.
No, they only came
with Kyle
here.
Whittingham.
Yeah,
Okay,
that was 2010. Yeah.
Yes.
They've only played once,
Okay.
I believe.
Definitely.
Because that was when Utah was still trying to prove themselves to become a Power 5 team. They were still in the Mountain West, and they were willing to go play teams like that.
Yeah. And that was a good win for Brian Kelly. Just really started a program.
We did a thing on the board the other day, Sean, where I said that was one of the 3 biggest wins because my argument was they were 4-5 at that point in time.
Yes, they were.
If they lose at home and then they got to play USC at USC in a couple weeks, they lose that game and fall to 4-6. I think that team collapses.
Yeah,
they don't finish the recruiting class the way they do, and I don't know if Brian Kelly ever recovers from that.
That could, man.
So I think that was a huge win, and they were like top 15. Notre Dame was supposed to get killed that game.
Yeah.
And then when Robert Blanton blocked that punt, it was like, okay, they got a shot to do this thing. Harrison Smith had one of the best interceptions I've ever seen a Notre Dame player make in that game, too, if you remember that.
So I'm going to go 2 ACC, 2 Big Ten, 1 SEC, 2 Pac-12.
Real quick, Sean, on your 2 Big Tens, is it Michigan State and Purdue, or Michigan State, Purdue takes one, and then somebody else takes another?
So I'll have a combination of 4.
Okay.
I'll have 2 teams on the West in the West. No. My combination is Penn State, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Purdue.
Okay.
Out of those 4, we're playing 2.
Okay. So you're going to have 2 Big Ten games in every year. So you could play Michigan State and Purdue the same year sometime. So basically, you're going to have 2 Big Ten games that's going to either be Penn State, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Purdue. And then occasionally you may work in Illinois if they're good enough, something like that. But that's pretty okay.
Yeah, or another program,
Okay, so then you also said you're going to have 2 ACCs, right?
2 ACCs.
DC is always going to be 1.
Yes.
And then you're going to rotate Virginia down to the Carolinas. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is what I'm going to do as well. Now, I'm going to play 2 academies, 2 of the 3.
Okay.
I like that.
Okay.
I like when you play Navy, Air Force, or Air Force, Army. I like that. I'm an old school guy.
Somebody asked the other day if we thought Notre Dame should play all 3 academies in the same year, and I said no. I don't.
No, not all.
Occasionally playing 2, but no, I definitely wouldn't go 3.
2 of the 3, I would love that. Now, the new Big 12 is going to be very interesting because Cincinnati could actually become a rival, low key. Cincinnati could become a rival
now that they're a Power 5.
Yes. That could become a rivalry, low key. So that's something to watch. So I would definitely do a Big 12 team. And then I will fluctuate between 2 SECs, 2 SEC teams, or 2 Pac-12 teams. I already know I'm playing USC, right? If I don't have a viable Pac-12 opponent, then I can go ahead and do 2 SEC teams.
Okay.
And then I have my Shamrock series. And then the Big 12, and then I'll have one open, like if they want to play an independent, or even if they wanted to substitute one of the academies for like what they're doing with Tennessee State 1 year, I will be cool with that. So what I have 2 ACC, 2 Big Ten.
So you have USC, Navy, BC plus another ACC.
Yes.
2 Big Tens. Another Pac-12, an SEC, a Shamrock, and a Big 12. So that gets you to 10.
Okay. You did the 2 academies, right?
Oh, nope. I did 2 academies. Okay. So that you're good. You got your 12. No, I'm sorry. That's 11. Because one of the academies is always going to be Navy, right? Okay. So it's Navy plus another academy.
You're right.
Right. Okay.
You're right.
Okay.
And from there, I guess you could you could leave it open.
I think you got, That's interesting. So then you got give you some flexibility. That's interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. I went with Tennessee. I would love to see Notre Dame start a rivalry with Tennessee where they play every year.
That was a great rivalry in the 90s.
Yeah.
Great game.
Back-to-back really, really good games.
Yes.
And recruiting, there'd be so many advantages to Notre Dame for doing that. So that's kind of how I went. So with my non-ACC schedule, I am going to be honest with you, Sean, I'm going to snitch on you. I am going to text Jarrett that we had a whole conversation about Notre Dame scheduling rivals, and you never mentioned Miami once.
I don't respect him. He knows that.
Okay.
He knows that. I told him they need to get their weight up. I tell them all the time, you need to get your weight up before you come talking to us.
Okay.
So
Very fair.
call him. It'll be a confirmation.
Fair.
It would definitely be a confirmation.
Okay. That's good stuff. Well, Sean, let's that was great. Let's finish up with just a couple questions here real quick. Baby Slater asked us early, is Notre Dame throwing their ace today? Can they beat Tennessee twice in a row? Yeah, it's not looking good. It's 9-0 right now in the fifth. They knocked out J.D. Bertrand, John Michael Bertrand in the fifth. So they just hung an 8 spot on Notre Dame in the fifth. So it's 9-0.
It's okay.
So not gonna go well with the ace on the mound today. But I do appreciate this super chat very, very, very much. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop also a super chat. Hope you feel better because I had a little issue before the show started. Good to see my guy Sean GC Davis. You want to explain what that means, Sean?
That's my new nickname that I was given. Good Christian.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, we're not going to go there. Awesome work by Marcus Freeman and staff. Caleb Downs and Richard Young come home. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I mean, we didn't even talk about Richard Young because he doesn't come until Monday. But that's another one. I'm just like, I don't see it, and even less so than Caleb Downs. Like
we're in the room.
Yeah,
we're in the room,
and that's just it's impactful. There's no doubt.
Isn't that strange? Like you hear Richard Young coming up for a visit, and then we talked about this. You really don't believe in it, but the buzz continues to build. Some people consider him the number 1 running back. Ruben Owens out of Texas. Like, would he actually leave Texas, the state of Texas, and go to Louisville? It's like it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks.
Oh, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I saw a crystal ball or one of those dumb things for Texas A&M today. So
cool.
I sometimes I feel like some of these programs are being used to generate like, hey, you know what? Fine, I'll just go to so and so. If you don't up your NIL stuff, you think because it's like if a school thinks they're going to get you, then what's the need for them to throw an NIL deal at you?
Right.
So, like, okay, well, let me make you think that I'm actually going to go somewhere else, and then you better step up and get it done is the key there. So D-Troll Hunter says, I have a feeling Brian started the Saturday show to get out of the weekend honey-do list. Let me explain something to y'all. If you think this show gets me out of the honey-do list, you are out of your mind. Either A, not married, or B, just really over, which I appreciate, giving me more credit, because all it does is it gives me 2.5 less hours in the day to mow the lawn, which is my honey-do list next. I will be finishing this up, putting a story on the site, and then going upstairs, changing gear, and putting on my mowing clothes, because that's getting done today. So I got like weeds this high in my front yard in one little patch because I've been so slammed this week. I haven't had a chance to mow the front yard. So yes, that's getting done today.
And I completed mine before we started the show.
Aren't you the overachiever? Brent Byers, I think this is a really underestimated part of the climb to the top of the proverbial college football mountain. The effect a culture change will have on the win-less results on Saturday, especially in bigger games. I think the last part, because look, say what you want about Brian Kelly. He had this program humming to the part where they weren't getting beat by unranked teams. I mean, they hadn't lost to an unranked team since 2016. So, I mean, they were beating the teams they were supposed to. The culture change, if it's going to have a win-loss impact, Brent, and I think you're spot on, it's going to be now there's a true belief that we can go down, we as looking at it from a player standpoint, we can go down to Miami in 2017 and get that dub. We can go to Ohio State and beat them in Columbus. We can go to Clemson next year and beat them at their place. Because at the end of the day, even in a game like Clemson 2015, Sean, where you think you're good enough, that little bit of doubt in the back of your mind is the difference between losing 24-22 or winning that one 27-24. That's the reality of it.
That's true.
And that's where the culture is going to be the change. Is do you really believe that you can go beat Ohio State? Because here's what happens. If you really, truly don't believe, and it's just about you, and you don't think the coaches, you don't have faith in the coaches, because part of culture, too, is I believe in the staff to put together a good game plan.
Yeah. Is
when they go down, when Ohio State goes down the field and puts that first drive, 6 plays, you don't stop them. They don't even get to a third down, touchdown. If you don't believe, it's like, uh-oh. But if you believe, like, we're good, coach is going to make the corrections, and you go back and you answer that.
Yeah.
That's what a healthy culture does, where what's been in the past is that just starts a steamroll of, uh-oh, here we go again. And it just, there's no stopping it. So Kenny Moore says, Oh, yeah, we brought that up earlier. So that was a great comment from Kenny. Timeout Tom said, Vince told me to ask this question again when Brian's on the show. On an official visit, is there a limit on the number of people that can come on a college's dime? Are siblings or a coach paid for? Sean, I think, is it still 2? I think it's 2. They can pay for 2.
Yeah.
Meaning like they'll pay for flights. Now, you can bring more than 2 people with you. Like if a mom wants to bring her 2 children, you can bring them with you, but you have to pay for their travel. You know, like they stay in a hotel with you and all that because you're staying in a hotel across the street. You can keep your kids in a hotel room with you. There's nothing wrong with that. You just can't get a second hotel room for your children and then another room for your coach and then another room for your mom.
Yep.
So you can fly. You can bring 10 people with you on an official visit. The school just can't pay for their travel or their hotel or other expenses like that.
Right.
That's the difference. And they don't make the kids stand over on the side and not let them eat. It's just, it's the travel and those type of things is what it comes down to. TL4ND, pure need standpoint, really need Gray, Bell, Ateez, and Flores. Is Great House this weekend or next? I'm sorry, my man. You've got to put Ronan Hanafin on there over Flores. I'm sorry. He's a better player. He's just a better player. You got to put Ronan Hanafin. And then Jaden Greathouse does visit next weekend. We'll have a similar conversation about this next weekend. And Micah Bell's also next weekend. So of the guys that are on campus on that list, Gray, Ateez, and Flores are all on campus this weekend. I don't disagree with your list at all. I just think you got to have Ronan Hanafin on that list. Reed Sadaway, I hope this weekend and next weekend are 2 great weekends where we look back and realize that this is when we went from gap closers to gap erasers. It's a very interesting comment. Got a super chat from Whodat. Who is coming to talk to Caleb Downs? Look, I appreciate that super chat very, very much, but I don't think Sean can reveal who that person is. But we do appreciate the super chat very, very much. And then 10-day Morad Zikwa. What is the staff doing showing the recruits to close the deal this weekend? Well, 10-day, I think it comes down to it depends on the kid. Right. I mean, for some kids, like for Christian Gray, for example, it's about really hammering home that family aspect.
Yeah.
For another kid like Jason Moore, he really wanted to kind of find out how Coach Washington's vision was for developing him as a player. For another kid, it may be the scheme fit. Man, just really how are you going to use me, right? For another kid, it may be an academic concern. Like I'm really concerned about I want to get a great education, but, I got people telling me in the SEC that I can't do this. You know what I mean? It's really different for every kid. And part of being great closers is knowing what the needs are for each recruit that's on campus.
Right.
You can't just have a one-size-fits-all approach to recruiting, right? Like, did you see the thing where Chad Bowden was dancing around when Preston Zinner and all them got on campus?
No.
Did you see that thing? I'll have to send it to you.
Oh, yeah. I saw it. Yeah. I did see it.
Well, you got to know who that works for and who that's going to turn off.
Right.
Right. That's part of recruiting. You got to know who is going to like sitting on the golden throne and who's going to be like, I don't do this. This isn't me. Like that's part of being a great recruiting staff, Sean, is I got to know what works for each player. What's the need? What's the biggest thing holding this kid back from picking us? And it's going to be different for every kid. And it's up to the coaches and the recruiting staff to know what that is and then make sure they schedule the weekend to where everybody gets those questions answered. And then what are some things they think that they care about or don't talk about, but that you have learned through your talks with the parents, with coaches, with other people, that this is going to be a thing that I think has an impact, that they don't even say to you, hey, I want to know about this. I think those are the things. And it's about relationships. You've got to know who you're recruiting. You've got to know who, what the needs are. You've got to know all the different aspects of what these young people are looking for. Sometimes it's what they say they're looking for.
Yeah.
For other times, it's I know this kid. I've gotten to know this kid, and he won't say it, but I really think this thing is important, and we're gonna answer that, and we're gonna meet that need, and we're gonna fill that void for this young man. So
it's also knowing what kids you think will bond and blend. Look, this is me. You can call me a conspiracy theorist. I've shared this with a couple of people. There was an evil genius to the construction of a certain trio at the Irish invasion. I fully believe that.
It's not conspiratorial. I fully
believe the staff knew if we get this trio together, these are 3 guys that probably would work well together, end up in a really good relationship. And what do you know? Bam. You saw it for yourself firsthand. That goes back to that staff doing that extra homework, right?
I think that also includes what of your own players.
Yeah.
You know, so like if you know a kid's got a concern, like, coach, man, I just don't really know about, you know, being this far away from my family, then you find a kid from it doesn't have to be from where he's from per se. If you can, that's great. But another kid that you knew had that same struggle that's thriving.
Yes.
Hey, look, I'm a mama's boy too. I admit that, right? Like, you know, but here's the deal. Here's how it worked. Here's why I've been able to thrive. So I think that's also too, is like, if a kid's got a struggle, academic struggle, girlfriend struggle, let's be real. That's real for teenage boys, right? Like, my girlfriend wants me to stay closer to home. Oh, okay. I need to make sure I get him around a dude that had that same struggle. Like, you know what I mean? Like, here's how we made it work, or here's why you shouldn't have to worry about that, right? You find them around players who've lived that experience that you believe are good ambassadors of your program. And so it's that, to your point, I agree 100%, Sean, with getting them around other recruits that they're going to connect with, but it's then also on top of that, making sure that they're able to connect with players on your team that either A, they'd get along with, or B, guys that you know went through a similar struggle that they went through.
Yeah.
And I think distance and girlfriends are the 2 primary ones for that. But academics are a piece of that too.
When it comes to faith, family, and hometown, I don't think there's another locker room more diverse than Notre Dame.
Right.
Like
geography,
faith, family background, all of that. When you get into that Notre Dame locker room, the diversity that exists, and yet and still, once again, tip your cap to the length and continuation of the brotherhood that exists with that. You know, so that impacts your recruiting. That impacts your recruiting. And you better have a staff that is able to talk to whomever's in front of them. And recognize who's in front of them. From the kid to the family to everything. It's a great question, 10-Day. Great question. Because I think it's a lot more complicated than people think. It's like some people think it's just rolling out the red carpet and you know, making a kid feel like, oh, you're fine. You know, no, for most kids, especially for Notre Dame kids, no, that's not it. That's cool. That's like a fun way to start the weekend. But trust me, Chad Bode didn't think that they're going to get Ronan Hanafin because he was jumping around. You know what I mean? Like, that's just a fun, like, icebreaker. Like, let's have some fun. But it's going to be about those. It's going to be about the meeting with Coach Reese and sitting down with Coach Stuckey and sitting down with Coach Freeman, and really helping him feel comfortable that this is the move. And that's what I like about this staff. Like, Chad can go from that to the other part like that. The other coaches can do the same thing, and that's what makes this a really special operation. Last question, I believe it's going to be the last one for us. Super chat from John Klimek. Getting them pipelines reestablished, recruits getting hype, have the audacity to go into a school's backyard, loving me some Freeman recruiting. Brian, Code Red ain't worth it, Sean. That hat is it. So some people were Tommy Guns, my main man, Tommy Guns. He tried to disrespect us yesterday, Vince. He compared Sean. He tried to disrespect me and Vince yesterday. He tried to say that drinking. He equated regular Mountain Dew to Brian Kelly and Code Red to Marcus Freeman, which is, for me, is like utter disrespect, because you're disrespecting like the nectar of the gods at that point in time. So John Klimek has my back, which I appreciate you. Code Red ain't worth it. That hat is it, John. You and others can get that hat in the merch store. There's no doubt about it. But I think, and in a serious note though, Sean, when you look at the first line and a half of what he put, it's not one thing that's changed. It's not just the culture. It's not just the recruiting. It's not just the audacity. It's all of these things happening at once, where Marcus Freeman didn't walk in and say, well, over the next couple of years, we need to establish this. No, he walked in and said, we're Notre Dame. This is what we're doing. Let's go. And if you're not with it, then find another place to be. That's it. Yeah.
And you got to do it all at once because it's bold, but it's being done because that's what he believes. It's not a strategy as much as it's a foundational principle of who he is and what he believes Notre Dame is. That's the key.
Yep.
That's the key. Did have a question here from Jay Henry. If Allsbury and Mpemba are at Notre Dame, could Allsbury, Mpemba, and Snead see the field at the same time? I could see that. I could see like Allsbury at will or Jaden Snead at will and then Mpemba at Mike. And then, like I said, the other guy at the other position. So, yeah, I could definitely see that. No doubt about it. So, Sean, that is going to do it. Kaya said, once Dante goes public, I'll drop a $1,000 super chat. Please don't do that. I'd rather you just do a $1,000 donation to Irish Breakdown because I don't want Google and YouTube to take 30% or 40% of that $1,000 super chat. So, but I like the sentiment. I'm not saying don't give us $1,000. I'm just saying let's do it a different format so we can we don't have to split so much of it with Google. I'm being selfish. I know. I can't help it. That's going to do it for today's show. Sean, I agree with Craig Doherty. Great show. Absolutely. So before you leave, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, buy some belt bars, but use the Irish Breakdown promo code to get 10% off your entire purchase. Hit up their merch store. If you want to get merch and you want to be on the message board, do them message board first, then merch, because if you sign up for the message board, we're going to give you a discount code for your entire purchase. Now, Sean doesn't have to use that because Sean got his merch because he worked for Irish Breakdown, but y'all are going to have to purchase that. But if you sign up for Irish Breakdown, you will get a promo code for either 10% off if you're a monthly member, 20% off if you're an annual member, to be part of what we're doing. So that is it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us. Sean, another great Saturday show. Everyone, thanks for being with us, and we will talk to you again on Monday, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Don't forget, we're launching the IB Nation Sports Talk Show on Monday night, 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Be ready for it with Sean Stiers. We'll talk to you all again soon. Thanks for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.